Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Rise in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 4, Niji is a pretentious little shit. Mission Report, D14. All allied targets henceforth designated by number code only, at 1, at 2, at 3, and at 4. Allied combatants X2 designated ACHN and ACNS. Allied non-combatant X1 designated ANHS. All allied targets successfully extracted to redacted kilometers from Konohagakure. At 1, at 3, ANHS sustained moderate fatigue, light dehydration. ACHN sustained mild fatigue. ACNS sustained moderate fatigue, light damage to left chest and left upper arm. Current course, hold position for 48 hours. Acquire provisions and medical supplies, additional supplies for at 2. Re-evaluate security of location. End report. Operative Cat 15. Crouched behind Hinata in front of the fire, Niji narrowed his eyes at the shinobi placing seals on the trees. They will wish to interrogate us, he said in a low voice. We have nothing to hide, Temari said flippantly, but her posture was tense. I'm more ISO than you, muttered Niji. Unless they are actually Konoha agents, Sai pointed out, and all of them turned to scrutinize the nearest, the one-eyed masked shinobi with grey hair, Heitake Kakashi, Temari had named him. Would a Konoha agent work with Akiri Nukanen, though? Sakura wondered aloud. They're not Konoha agents, Suzuki snapped quietly. Niji sneered. I suppose you consider yourself unbiased. Suzuki puffed up indignantly. Shut up, Temari snapped, distracted, before he could respond. This isn't the time to pick fights. Niji glared at both her and the Uchiha spawn half-heartedly, but she was right. He turned back to look at the gray-haired shinobi, only to start when he discovered the man was already staring at him. Niji, I think he's looking at you, whispered the blonde brat in a voice that was much too loud to really be called a whisper. Shut up, Naruto, muttered Suzuki, rolling his eyes. Heitake raised an eyebrow and jerked his head towards the edge of the camp in a clear summons. Niji reflexively traded a glance with Temari. Watch over Hinata-sama, he said automatically, his mouth suddenly dry. Yeah, Temari murmured and gave him an solemn nod. Gathering his composure about him, Niji found his feet and followed. The shinobi leaned against the trunk of a tree and gestured at a fallen log across from him. Niji eyed him, then the log, and perched gingerly, angled in a way to keep both Heitake and the others in his normal line of view. What's your name? The gray-haired man tucked his hands in his pockets, carefully non-threatening. Niji knew for a fact that the shinobi knew what his name was. Hyuga Niji, he answered anyways, straightening his back and lifting his chin. The man hummed nonchalantly. And do you know my name? With a suspicious glance, Niji said, Heitake Kakashi. Former Jounin of Konohagakure. The man said again. Why don't you tell me about how you came to leave Konoha? Niji turned his head towards the fire. The night the Sandaime Hokage was assassinated, I was Hinata-sama's appointed guard. A little young to be entrusted with the heiress, You would have been 8 years old. Niji hid a scowl. I was excelling in the academy and with my studies in the Juken style. Hayashi-sama decided I should begin my responsibilities as a member of the branch family. Heitake's expression didn't change. You must have resented that, he noted idly. Niji tamped down the heat rising in his throat like bile. It is an honor to serve Hinata-sama in whatever way I can, he snapped. And the shinobi eyed him for a moment. You were keeping watch. And then there was a disturbance at the front of the compound. I could see attackers from the front and rear of the compound, battling the guards and those of my clan that rushed to respond. He hesitated, a frown settling on his face unconsciously. There was a shockwave. It knocked everyone off their feet. The umbu came then. Nico-sensei. Heitake leaned forward a little. And did Nico-sensei ever tell you her name? Niji shook his head. No. Only her code name, Cat 15. And you just went with her, the shinobi asked. Yes, Niji bristled. The compound was under attack, and as far as I could see, the rest of the village was as well. Makoto Nii confirmed that the protocol was legitimate, and believed that the heiress and her sister would be significantly more secure at a safe house instead of in the village during an invasion. I followed his lead. Heitake nodded thoughtfully. What can you tell me about Makoto? Hyuga Makoto. 24 years of age, Chiyunin at age 18, Niji recited. Retired from the General Corps at age 22 following a traumatic mission. Stationed at the main compound, on rotation as the personal guard for Hyuga Hanabi. By the time Heitake let him go back to the others, Niji was strung out and on edge. The other one-eyed shinobi had pulled both Sakura and Temari away and brought them back, with Hinata-sama now staring at the ground between them. At another quadrant, Naruto was loudly extolling the virtues of a particular ramen shop in Konoha to a blank-faced Itachi. That was long, Temari noted, sending a glance over his shoulder towards Heitake. HN, said Niji, glaring at the shinobi interrogating Hinata. He was definitely not in the mood for conversation. His name's Shisui, Temari said, following his stare. He asked a bunch of questions about why Gaara and I left Suna. What did Heitake want to know? Everything, Niji snapped. Why I am here, my dead cousin Makoto, how we met Nico-sensei. And you. He's calling me, Sasuke cut in, voice uncharacteristically quiet. They all turned. Sure enough, Heitake was staring at the youngest Uchiha. I don't think he'll hurt you, whispered Sakura, huddled between Gaara and the fire. He will just want answers, agreed Niji begrudgingly. He likely wants to eliminate any potential bias from either of the Uchiha questioning you. Don't keep him waiting, then, said Temari, nodding at Sasuke encouragingly. Niji watched him go before turning back to glare at the Uchiha with Hinata-sama once again. Shisui. For a moment, the five were quiet. Temari watched the trees behind his back. The ever-present shifting of the Jinhiraki's sand hissed softly below the whisper of the breeze. He heard it first, turning his head towards the almost imperceptible scrabbling. Cover me, Sai breathed. Niji shifted to block him from Shisui's view, while Temari pulled Sakura over next to her, covering him from Sasuke's brother. He stared around the clearing warily, but none of the shinobi paid them any mind other than a cursory glance. Sai slipped a small scroll out of his pocket and unfurled it just enough for a small black mouse to hurl itself at the blank paper. Niji glanced down at the single word and his eyes widened, darting up automatically to meet Temari's as Sai continued to stare at the message. Clear. Clear, understood, message received. Clear, free of danger. Clear, definite. Clear, permission given to proceed. Clear, far away from, removed. Sai snapped the scroll shut. Clear, Nico-sensei wasn't coming. They were on their own. Finally, Temari's mouth quirked in a wry smile. I guess these guys are for real, she said at last, giving Sakura's shoulder a squeeze, but her eyes were hard. Sakura smiled tremulously. We're safe, she whispered, but her shoulders remained hunched and tense. She didn't really believe it. Niji didn't either. It's Niji-kun, right? Niji, who had been blinking groggily at the smoldering remains of the fire as dawn lit the edge of the trees, jerked his head up sharply. The older Uchiha Shisui was wearing a pack and a traveling cloak slung over his shoulders. Hi, he answered shortly, taking a quick glance around the rest of the clearing. While all the other shinobi were up minus the youngest, the one that looked around Niji's own age, none of them seemed inclined to move. Can you hold a good henge for a couple of hours? Shisui asked, and Niji's attention snapped back to him. Yes, replied Niji, allowing his suspicion to color his voice. Shisui nodded. Good. How about, Sakura-chan? The pink-haired girl flinched at the corner of his eye. Yeah, she squeaked, then frowned, and cleared her throat. I can do it, she said, jerking her head up defiantly even as her voice quavered. Like a kitten growling at a panther. Pitiful, perhaps ill-advised, and quite unlikely to be taken seriously, but commendable. Excellent, Shisui said cheerfully. I'm heading into town to pick up some supplies. Why don't you two accompany me? He stared at the Uchiha silently as Sakura turned nervous eyes on Niji. He nudged Temari with his foot. She woke immediately from a light sleep, sitting up quickly with squinted eyes. Why? He asked slowly. I figured you'll need more clothes, so I thought you could help me pick some out, he answered readily, the hint of a smile crinkling the corners of his mouth. Niji narrowed his eyes. Why them? Temari cut in, voice rough with sleep. Shisui blinked slowly. Tetsu can get rather cold, especially in the winter, and you all seem to be kitted out for IWA summers, he said. Niji-kun and Sakura-chan are pretty representative of the sizes of clothes the rest of your group will need, and it's less suspicious if I go into town with 2 kids versus 8. Said Temari, and raised a brow at Niji. He gritted his teeth. Very well, he said. Sakura. The girl twitched again. Okay, she agreed. Good. Great, said Shisui. Come on, then. It's a bit of a run, but we can get breakfast when we hit town. Sound good? Sakura nodded once, tentatively. Niji said nothing, but rose to his feet gracefully. Cool, said Shisui, eyes flicking between the two. The rest of you will probably start moving again in an hour or so, he told Temari, who nodded, the sleep fog fading from her eyes. He gave Temari a friendly nod and turned slightly to offer Heitake a 2-fingered salute before moving away. Watch over Hinata-sama, Niji told her, before following the Shisui out of the camp. Shisui set a pace that was a light jog for himself and an easy run for Niji, but just a few kilometers later, he could see Sakura struggling to control her breathing out of the corner of his eye. As a civilian born, she was the weakest of the others. Naruto, though an orphan, had the benefit of seemingly endless stamina, and the best efforts of the clan's training had managed to give Hinata-sama an edge over the other girl. Perhaps they should have brought along Hinata-sama instead, though she would doubtless have made them look suspicious with her stuttering and inability to meet another's eyes. The clan had yet to train her out of that habit, unbefitting of their heiress as it was. Sakura's breaths degraded into harsh panting. Niji eyed her out of the corner of his eye. Blotches of red stained her cheeks, but her eyes glinted with stubbornness. Shisui's effortless strides slowed to a stop. Niji stopped as well, and Sakura stumbled to a halt beside him. This is a good place to take a break, said Shisui. Niji-kun, Sakura-chan, do either of you want some water? Niji took a few deep breaths to slow his heartbeat. Yes, he said. Sakura, leaning against the tree with her eyes closed looking rather faint, did not respond. We will both require water, he amended grudgingly. Shisui handed him a canteen, regarding Sakura with a mixture of bemusement and mild alarm. Unused to civilian weakness perhaps. We have a few kilometers left, the shinobi said, crossing his arms comfortably. Sakura-chan, I'll carry you until we're a kilometer or 2 out, and then we'll walk the rest of the way. I can run, Sakura rasped, opening her eyes at last and hauling herself upright. She swayed on her feet. After one last sip from the canteen, Niji passed it to her. She was stubborn, but she didn't have the strength to back it up. It was a foolish claim to make. You need to save your strength, Shisui said firmly. Once we reach the road, you need to be able to keep up a constant henge until we're out of town. If you drop the henge because you're too tired, all of us will be in jeopardy. Niji eyed the girl out of the corner of his eye, increasingly dubious. Niji-kun, said Shisui. Niji turned politely. Are you able to continue running? Niji allowed just the hint of a frown onto his face. The Hyuga trained their children young, and he was the best the Hyuga clan had produced in generations. His skills were genin level at least. Yes, he said shortly. Shisui merely nodded in acknowledgement, shifting his pack around to his front. If you're ready, Sakura-chan. Sakura skittered up to him uncomfortably, keeping Niji between them for as long as possible before approaching the Uchiha teen and clinging awkwardly to his neck. For his part, Shisui crouched remarkably patiently until the girl had wrapped her legs around his waist. Here we go, the Uchiha said cheerfully. They went. Shisui set a faster pace this time, the kind of run that left Niji breathing hard but not desperately. He was aware, of course, that the shinobi was still moving much more slowly than he normally would when traveling on his own, and the thought of the allowances he was making for Niji, who wasn't as strong, rankled. At least he was able to run himself, though. He spared a quick glance for Sakura. She looked vaguely seasick. After perhaps half an hour of this, at which point Niji had begun taking deliberately deep breaths so as not to gasp for air, Shisui slowed, then stopped, crouching to let Sakura off. Niji paced slowly with half his usual grace, legs stiff and uncooperative. "We're a couple clicks out of town, so we'll take another break and walk in," Shisui announced, passing the water to Niji. He took it gratefully, forcing himself not to gulp. Sakura brushed her hands down her shirt absently. She was frowning, hair falling over her eyes. "This is the important part," Shisui continued, his tone hardening almost imperceptibly. Sakura's spine straightened, and she looked up. Niji set down the canteen. "This is a town that samurai are known to frequent, and shinobi are very much not welcome here," Shisui warned. "Should the samurai discover who or what you are, you will at the least be forcibly removed from the country, or at worst, captured and eventually killed. Do you understand?" "Yes," said Niji. Sakura echoed him quietly. "Good," said Shisui, and took stock of their expressions. "I'm not trying to deliberately scare you," he said, "but this is much more dangerous than even flying under the radar in Tsuki no Kuni. You need to stay alert at all times." "We understand," Niji assured him, voice unwavering, but he could feel the shot of adrenaline that surged through his veins at the thought of discovery. Shisui let out a short breath. "Okay. This is our cover, the two of you will be my younger brother and sister. Our family are merchants who specialize in metal products, like cookware and basins, and are currently at a town in the east to resupply. The three of us are here to acquire clothing and other provisions before we all head further north." He considered them thoughtfully. "Henges are easiest to hold when they're simple," Shisui continued. "So each of us will change our hair color to a medium dark brown and our eye color to dark gray. Watch," he ordered, hands flickering through seals. His eyes lightened and his hair changed color without even a wisp of smoke, bleeding into a shade lighter than the trees surrounding them with just a hint of red. "Try to match the colors as best you can." He glanced between them. "Niji-kun, go ahead." Niji narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing the shinobi's hair. "Hi," he acknowledged, and began going through the hand seals. "Henge," he muttered, and blinked away the smoke. "Good," Shisui said approvingly. "Your hair is a little darker, but that's fine. Better, even." Niji suppressed a frown and tilted his head forward until the shoulder-length strands dangled next to his eyes. They were indeed a couple shades darker than Shisui's. "Now, Sakura-chan," Shisui prompted. The girl concentrated on her hands, forming the seals precisely and confidently, if not quickly. "Henge," she said firmly, and was enveloped in a thin veil of smoke. Niji leaned forward despite himself. Sakura's hair and eyes were exactly the same shades as Shisui's. He caught himself scowling and wiped the expression from his face. "Nicely done, Sakura-chan," Shisui praised. "You have a good eye for detail." She beamed widely. "Thanks, Shisui-san," she chirped. "Try not to say my name while we're in town," Shisui warned. "You can call me Uni-san and I'll call you Tuimuto and Otauto." He gave each of them a careful look. "Okay, let me just..." He closed his eyes and flashed through hand seals again, and the slant of his eyes flattened, his nose narrowed, and his face elongated. Niji stared in morbid fascination. The Uchiha had a darker complexion now, Sakura's nose, and a bit of Niji's eyes. Watching the process somehow made the changes seem profoundly wrong. At his other side, Sakura was unable to tear her gaze away, eyes wide with a horrified interest. Shisui opened his eyes to their stares. "It's just a henge, same as yours," he reassured them, just a hint of amusement in his voice. Niji nodded slowly, but seeing that face talk after he'd seen it warp like some sort of melting candle made it even more strange. He could see that face without flinching, of course, by the time they reached the town. It was a largely unremarkable place, wooden buildings with rusting tin roofs, cobblestone streets, precarious streetlights somewhat ambiguously ringed by a low stone wall. The townspeople largely ignored them as they walked down the main street, busied with drawing water from a well, preparing the day's meals, or housekeeping, doors flung open as occupants called out friendly overtures to acquaintances passing by. A butcher hacked at the meaty ribcage of a cow, his apprentice sharpening cleavers on the other side of the yard. A trio of boys darted across the road, deftly avoiding a man with a handcart full of sacks of rice or barley or wheat as they taunted and called out to each other. Sakura hovered closely at Niji's side, which he endured with a long-suffering grace, even when she tread on the back of his sandal. Shisui's hunter's prowl had transitioned into a flat-footed tramp, but he strode forward just as quickly. "What do you two want to eat?" he asked lightly. "It's a bit late for breakfast, but we could call it brunch." "Dango," Sakura said wistfully, almost immediately. "Anko dango." If you meant lunch food, Niji cut in delicately, perhaps soba would be appropriate. "Soba and dango." "Sounds good," Shisui agreed cheerfully. "Come on, you two. I bet we can find some in the market district." That was not a bet Niji would take. He followed readily as Shisui headed towards the loudest part of the town. Many of the stores were open air, with boxes and crates of fresh produce lined up outside storefronts. A barbecue restaurant had a cart with steaming whole roast chickens and half a small pig parked outside. Niji dodged a woman carrying a basket heaping with loaves of bread, dragging Sakura with him by the sleeve. "There," said Sakura distractedly, stumbling into his side. "It's a noodle shop." "So it is," Shisui said, and changed course for the restaurant. It was a clean enough place, Niji supposed, but he sat down gingerly all the same on the rickety wooden bench and eyed the menu inked onto the wall. "Kaminanban for me, I think," decided Shisui aloud. "What about you two?" "Nishin soba," answered Niji. It had been so long since he'd had soba, longer still since he'd had his favorite topping, herring, with it. "Hayashi soba," Sakura chimed in, expression a little dreamy. Niji eyed her warily. Tamari had talked once about how she'd missed dorayaki, one of her favorite childhood foods, when her father forbade the children from pastries, and years later she'd snuck one in the market. It hadn't tasted the way she remembered, just cloyingly sweet and sticky. Time had idealized the memory. This was most definitely not the case for Niji's Nishin soba. In fact, it tasted even better than he remembered. It could have been due in part to the fact that this was the first time he'd actually eaten in a restaurant in over a year, even on those rare occasions when the group had scraped together enough money to buy a ready-made meal, they'd taken it to go and shared it in the relative safety of their home base. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten so comfortably. Or so much. Too much, actually. Niji glanced down at his bowl. It was still at least half full, but he didn't think he could eat another bite. Sakura, who had been methodically taking small bites of her own soba, seemed to have arrived to the same conclusion. She stared at the remains of her meal despondently. "Well then," said Shisui. "I suppose we should get these to go." Their next stop was a general clothing and miscellaneous store towards the edge of the market district. Inside was dim and musty, with most of the light coming in from the store windows. Niji paused just inside the door, surveying the rows of racks of clothing. Shisui glanced back at them. "Why don't you two take a look around?" he suggested. "Let me know if you see anything you like, and we'll see if it's something we can get." "Hi," said Niji, more than willing to take the chance for relative privacy. He tugged Sakura along by her grip on his sleeve into the racks of clothes. Sakura touched the clothes tentatively, as if afraid of breaking or dirtying them, then with more interest. "Oh," she murmured to herself, fingering a pink sequined shirt. "That is extremely impractical," Niji told her, brushing it out of her grip distractedly. Across the store Shisui had approached the storekeeper. "Suitable for winter," he was saying. "Ah, yes," said the storekeeper. "We do have a nice selection of sweaters, jackets, and cloaks, if you'd like to take a look." He bustled out from behind the counter, leading Shisui around to the back of the store. Niji nudged Sakura to the next set of racks to keep them in sight. She went willingly enough. These held a selection of plain pants, and Sakura seemed to approve of the fabric. "We all need these," she muttered to him. He eyed them critically. "They seem all right," he allowed, before returning his attention to Shisui. "And what about these?" Shisui was saying, gesturing at something out of Niji's line of sight. "Ah. Good choice. Those cloaks are waterproof canvas, lined with bear fur, adjustable length through this detachable." "Do you think we need shirts?" asked Sakura, wandering to a shelf stacked with shirts of soft fabric. Niji glanced over. Not those, he dismissed. Those will tear much too easily. Haven't you sold any? Asked Shisui curiously. Ah, the storekeeper responded. Well, they are a little, heavy. Shisui leaned over, presumably to pick one up. I see, he said blandly. He raised his voice. Otauto? Imuto? Would you come here, please? Sakura dragged a hand over the shirts reluctantly. Come, Niji hissed impatiently, fighting the urge to roll his eyes, and forcibly maneuvered her by the shoulder. The cloaks in question were a gray-brown and hooded. Shisui had one in his hand. Try this on, Otauto, he said, already fanning it out to drape over Niji. Niji's eyes flashed to the storekeeper, who'd opened his mouth as if to say something, hesitated, and closed it. Shisui dropped the cloak onto his shoulders. Niji staggered under its weight. What, he muttered. The cloak was not only heavy, it was much too long, designed for an adult. It dragged on the ground. It is a nice cloak, Shisui said thoughtfully. All right. We'll take them. Sakura eyed Niji dubiously. Niji scowled. You will, said the storekeeper, surprised. I mean, great. Ah, how many? 3. All of them, Shisui said blithely. All of them, the storekeeper choked out. All of them? Sakura mouthed at Niji. He shrugged, just as bemused. Well, we are heading north, reasoned Shisui. I'm sure my mother will be able to find a market for them when it's a little colder. I'll just take them off your hands, Oh, thank you, said the storekeeper, confused. You're welcome, said Shisui cheerfully. Mind boxing these up for me? And not at all, said the storekeeper hesitantly, before turning to wrestle the cloaks off the rack. Just give me a moment, he said, voice strained. Of course, responded Shisui genially. Imuto, Otauto, did you find anything you liked? Sakura lit up, the strange cloaks forgotten. We need pants, she said brightly, darting back into the racks. Shisui followed indulgently. Niji grimaced at the folds of the disproportionately heavy cloak, leaning over to bundle up the extra cloth in his arms before he could follow. Sakura, it seemed, successfully sold Shisui on the pants, because he ahhed and hummed at the right moments and finally said, sounds good, and carried an armful to the front counter, leaving Sakura equal parts exhilarated and bewildered behind him. He's actually getting them, she hissed to Niji. Is it for real? Is it an act? Niji narrowed his eyes and shrugged. It could just be for our cover, he warned. I know, said Sakura, worrying at her lip. Niji eyed her with some distaste until she stopped guiltily. All right, kids, we're done here, said Shisui, breezing past and leaving them to follow in his wake. Sakura glanced back as they exited the store. We're not buying anything, she asked, confused. We are. We did, said Shisui, but I don't want to carry all that around, so Tenshu-san kindly agreed to hold onto it until we're ready to leave town. He stopped when they reached the street corner. I've got a couple more things to grab, but why don't you two see if you can find some of the local kids to play with, he suggested. Niji narrowed his eyes, barely short of a glare, as Sakura's mouth twisted uncertainly. I do not play, Niji said derisively. Shisui glanced up at the sky for a brief moment. Okay, look, he said, crouching to their level and lowering his voice. Children are pretty perceptive about whatever goes on or potential dangers around a town and usually give out information out more freely than adults. It looks weird if a grown-up starts chatting to all the kids, but you two have the advantage of age, yeah? Talk to the local kids, see what to look out for around here. Sakura glanced at Niji. We could do that, she said. Niji frowned. Very well, he conceded grudgingly. Try not to ask anything too directly, Shisui added, almost as an afterthought. And make your henge doesn't slip. He squinted up at the sky. Let's meet back here when the sun's directly overhead. It should be about an hour. Hi, said Niji, and pulled Sakura in the opposite direction as the Uchiha turned away. He eyed her carefully. Can you keep that up? He asked, jerking his head at her hair. Sakura considered for a moment. Yes, she said confidently. Niji surveyed the streets dolefully. I suppose we should find some children, then. Sakura seemed unreasonably cheerful at this proposition. She let go of his sleeve to run ahead, and consequently was the one who found a small cluster of boys near the wall off the market district. Hi, she called, skipping forward. Niji belatedly grabbed for her and missed. I'm Kanako. Can we play with you? All four boys turned to stare at them. One of them had strong, pointed features and looked just a little younger than Shisui, the others all seemed to be around Niji's age. You're a girl, said the shortest, scrunching his nose and sweeping dirty blonde hair out of his eyes. Sakura folded her arms belligerently as Niji came up behind her. And, she demanded. Girls play with dolls and their hair, the boy retorted. Niji glowered at the boy over Sakura's shoulder, who scowled right back at them. Kawa the oldest began admonishingly, but Sakura interrupted him. Well, I don't, she snapped. I like playing bandits, and hunters, and monsters. A pause. One of the other boys snorted. She's got you there, Kawa. Shut up, Kokaku, Kawa retorted good-naturedly. All right, if you like playing bandits, you can play with us. I'm Kawa, this is Kokaku, that, he pointed at the last boy, with black hair and dark brown eyes who raised a hand in a lazy wave, is Hikaru, and Owazaru's watching us. What he means, said the teen, is I attempt to minimize the property damage. It is nice to meet you, Kanako-san, and... Niji opened his mouth, but Sakura beat him to it. This is my brother, Jiro. He doesn't talk much. Niji frowned but didn't correct her. It is a pleasure, Owazaru said pleasantly, inclining his head. Yeah, cool, said Kawa impatiently. So, how do you play hunters and monsters? Sakura brightened, edging closer to the group. So one group is monsters and they come out at night and try to catch the hunters, and when they catch a hunter the hunter has to drop down on the ground until another hunter can come and save them. But if it becomes morning and they didn't get saved they become a monster too, and during the day the hunters try and catch the monsters. The kid with brown hair and blue eyes Kokaku looked doubtful. Kanako likes to play in the middle of the open market, Niji interjected, borrowing one of Naruto's ill-advised ideas. Where there are more obstacles. Chaos, more accurately. There was a gleam in Kawa's eye that reminded him eerily of the aforementioned blonde brat. I see, he said, a grin slowly spreading on his face. No, Kawa, Owazaru interjected firmly. But... No, Kawa. I don't think people will take too kindly to us playing monsters in the middle of the town, anyways, muttered Kokaku. Niji exchanged a glance with Sakura. Why not, he asked. You aren't from around here, are you? Kokaku noted, not unkindly. Well, it's kind of an urban legend but people say the forest around here is haunted by demons and monsters. Yeah, sometimes people go out hunting and come back and say they saw giant white wolves with teeth like daggers that could eat a man in one bite, Kawa agreed. Or a demon girl with a bloody grin. Merchants will come in and say they were chased by shadowy beasts at night. There have been increased incidents in the past month, Owazaru informed them. The traders in the marketplace currently are most unnerved by the situation and would likely take unkindly to that sort of game. Ah, said Sakura, disappointment flickering across her face. What do you like to play, then? There's pirates and samurai, Hikaru offered. Bah, Kawa wrinkled his nose. I'd rather be a Ronin than a samurai or a pirate. Why? Asked Sakura curiously. Samurai sound pretty cool. They're signing up to die early, Kawa said derisively, at the same time Hikaru said, they are. Kawa turned an incredulous stare on Hikaru as the other boy shrugged. They fight pirates and protect people, that's pretty cool. It is a noble profession, Owazaru added. To protect those weaker than oneself. Have you seen samurai before? Sakura asked. They come in town sometimes, Kokaku said. We've all seen them at least once or twice. My father was a samurai, Kawa bit out. And because of it, he died the day I was born. For an awkward moment, the other boys and Sakura exchanged uncertain glances. I'd rather be a Ronin, Kawa repeated. Fight for no sword but my own. Go wherever the wind takes me, meet new people, try new foods and all that. You're allergic to every other thing on this earth, Kawa, said Kokaku, rolling his eyes. Trying new food is like flipping a coin to avoid getting stabbed. Speaking of flipping coins and stabbing, said Kawa. We gotta do something. I'm so bored. Might I suggest a sedentary activity, such as card games, said Owazaru, eyeing the other 5. Noted, Kawa said cheerfully. Let's go on the roof. Niji watched as the blonde scrambled up the stone perimeter wall and took a flying leap across the narrow gap to the roof of a nearby store, and wondered if this was what civilian children normally did. The other 3 boys stared at their friend with varying degrees of exasperation. Kawa leaned back over the edge of the roof. "Come on, guys," he urged. Hikaru, closest to the wall, shrugged. "To the roof," he said, and hauled himself up the wall with surprising grace. Kokaku rolled his eyes, muttered under his breath, and ultimately had to be heaved up the wall by Owazaru, who took the turn of events with a long-suffering air. That left Niji and Sakura. "I'll give you a lift, Kanako-chan," said Niji. Sakura frowned. "I can make it myself," she insisted, starting for the wall. "Kanako," said Niji, gritting his teeth. Sakura hesitated. He narrowed his eyes at her. "Fine," she relented, and deigned to let him boost her up until Owazaru could swing her to the top of the wall. From the roof, the 6 had an excellent vantage of the open market, particularly the section with fresh produce, a bakery, and one penned-off area milling with chickens. For the first time since Ashino, Niji allowed himself to relax, removed from the bustle of the town. "Hey," said Kawa, kicking his legs off the edge. "Hey, guys, do you dare me to steal one of old Saburo's chickens?" "For God's sake," muttered Kokaku, at the same time Owazaru said, "No." Said Sakura. Niji agreed. But Kawa had that light in his eyes again. "I can't believe you guys are making me do this," he said gleefully, not even listening to his companions. "We're not," Hikaru interjected helpfully, but watched the man with the chickens interestedly. In one motion, Kawa scooted right off the edge of the roof. Sakura yelped in surprise, but none of the others reacted except for Kokaku, who rolled his eyes again. Niji leaned over the edge in time to see Kawa clamber off a stack of hay bales. "This is so wild, you guys are so messed up for making me do this," he called up, and then darted toward the chicken pens. "Is he all right?" Niji asked bemusedly, staring after the retreating back. "Kawa's interesting," Hikaru sighed, heaving himself up to follow the other boy over the edge of the roof. "He makes everything interesting." "He makes everything trouble," Kokaku growled, dropping off the roof after him. Niji glanced back at Owazaru, the last one on the roof. Owazaru looked resigned. "I believe it is time for Kanako and myself to depart," Niji said. "Probably for the best," Owazaru agreed. "Kawa has a tendency to generate havoc. Safe travels, Jiro-san, Kanako-san." "Bye, Owazaru-san," Sakura chirped, and followed Niji over the edge. "Civilians are weird," she whispered as they hurried back to the rendezvous. Behind them, the squawking of the chickens increased exponentially in volume. "Indeed," Niji agreed, slightly disturbed by the morning's proceedings. Shisui was waiting where they'd left him with eyes half closed and one hand in his pocket, a burlap sack over half his height leaning against the corner at his side. "Is that Dango?" Sakura gasped, running ahead of Niji. He frowned at her back. "With Anko sauce," said Shisui, eyes crinkling in a smile. He held one stick out to her and offered the other to Niji. Niji plucked it from his fingers and inspected it delicately. "Thank you," he said. Sakura echoed him, muffled. Shisui swung the sack over his shoulder easily. "Did you two have fun?" he asked. Niji glanced at Sakura, who had a mouthful of dango. "It was informative," he allowed. "Oh," said Shisui. "What did you learn?" "Civilians are weird," said Sakura empathetically. That startled a laugh out of Shisui. "Anything else?" he asked, amused. "Samurai come by this town every so often," Niji offered. "And pirates seem to be a genuine threat, though perhaps only along the coast. And there are monsters in the forest," Sakura added. Like giant wolves. Said Shisui. The townspeople are comfortable enough during the day to leave their doors open and their children unsupervised, countered Niji, narrowing his eyes at her. The forest monsters are likely just superstition. There's usually a kernel of truth in urban legends, Shisui said pensively. The side trip to the village, while uneventful, helped alleviate the monotony of travel. Niji still didn't know where they were going. The shinobi had all cryptically answered something along the lines of, a safer place, when asked. This was currently the cause of contention among Niji's group once again. Nico-sensei said they're alright, Sakura said doubtfully. We think Nico-sensei says they're alright, muttered Niji. He glared around the huddle of children that had instinctively formed after Hatake had called the last break. My jutsu cannot be forged, Sai countered. I trust them, interjected Sasuke, unsurprisingly. They seem pretty nice, Naruto agreed. They feed us a lot. Oh, they seem nice, Niji sneered. Have you forgotten that a shinobi is a master of deception? Enough, snapped Temari. We've been over this. Whether or not this is a trap, we can't do anything about it yet. The chances of them killing one of us is slim. Even if they try, we have Gaara. Niji glanced at the boy, a silent shadow at his sister's side. Although he had witnessed the Jinchuriki kill an Umbu assassin with frightening ruthlessness, he wasn't so sure Gaara would jump to anyone's defense other than Temari's, or possibly Naruto's. Gaara wasn't paying attention to their conversation. Instead, he stared out into the forest, just the hint of a furrowed brow on his blank face. Gaara. Temari prompted, her voice sharp. There's something out there, Gaara muttered as Niji flipped through the seals to activate his Byakugan. With a burst of chakra, Niji let his gaze expand, sweeping past Hinata-sama as she activated her own eyes, the other children and the shinobi in the clearing, past the trees and the brush and scattered birds in the branches. He sucked in a harsh breath, his focus narrowing in on the silhouettes just on the edge of his range. Shadowy beasts, Kawa had said. Giant white wolves with teeth like daggers. Ah, Hinata stuttered. There's, wolves, Niji said. Well, if it's just forest animals, Temari began, but Niji cut her off. They're not regular animals, he said tersely, watching the massive creatures lope closer, and reached for the kunao in the pouch strapped beneath his shirt. Much too large, they're familiars. There's a shinobi, Hinata whispered. Are riding on O1. Sakura, Hinata, Sasuke, Naruto, stay back, Temari ordered, palming a kunao in each hand. Sai slid the tanto out of its sheath, even as Gaara stepped up to his side, the sand whispering at his feet. We can fight. Naruto insisted. You need to guard our backs, Sai instructed calmly, even as he swept his blade back into a ready position. Stand down, Hatake drawled from across the clearing. They're friendlies. None of them relaxed. How is a giant wolf a friendly? Sasuke hissed, spinning a kunao in his hand nervously. Niji tracked the wolves' progress with narrowed eyes. They're not acting aggressive, he noted doubtfully. Said Temari, stepping back a little to the rest of the group. While Hatake's posture remained loose and relaxed, the kid with the Kiri no Kinin shifted uncomfortably at the swordsman's back. Shisui sent a distracted, if reassuring smile in his direction. When the wolves finally stalked into the clearing, Niji let his Byakugan fade and caught his breath as the world returned in full color. The pair were bigger than Hatake's largest ninkin and as tall as horses, with lush, snowy fur and acid yellow eyes. They wove in and out of each other's paths as easily as leaves in the wind on feather-light paws. From the shoulders of the lead wolf slipped a kunoichi wearing the same white pelt as her companions and a string of fangs about her throat. Despite her feral appearance, however, her eyes were sharp and assessing as she sized up the group. San, greeted Hatake, straightening from his slouch. Kakashi, the kunoichi responded, even as her eyes landed on Niji and the others curiously. It's good to see you. She waved her hand at her wolves. This is Yuuki, of course, she introduced, patting the one she'd been riding, and that's Chie. She nodded her head in Niji's direction. This is them. I apologize for the short notice, said Hatake, but they need to be out of sight as soon as possible. I'll let them introduce themselves later, but these are Uchiha Itachi, Uchiha Shisui dash. Itachi dipped his head while the other offered a lazy salute, Mamakai Zabuza, and Haku. Inyazuka-san, said the kunoichi, ducking her head in a shallow bow before turning a fierce stare on the group of shinobi children huddled at the far end of the clearing. We need to move fast, and it's all uphill from here, she said. Who wants to ride with you, Uki, and who wants to go with Chie? It was perhaps a testament to a strange few days, or years, that none of the others kicked up much of a fuss, not even Hinata-sama, though admittedly she would be more inclined to panic and perhaps faint rather than fuss over riding a giant wolf that looked much more likely to eat them than Heitake's placid Ninken. This is awesome, Naruto cackled quietly for him. Niji. Niji grimaced as the blonde's arms tightened around his waist. He tangled his hands further into the wolf's ruff and didn't respond. Predictably, Naruto was undeterred. Do you think I can get a wolf? He wondered out loud. That would be so cool. You don't get a wolf, idiot, Sasuke muttered from behind Naruto, his words nearly carried away by the wind. The familiar chooses you, not the other way around. And it's usually a clan thing. Oh, said Naruto. Then, is San part of a clan thing? She said she's Inyazuka, Niji felt compelled to point out. Is that a clan thing? Niji closed his eyes and took a calming breath that was promptly jarred out of him by the wolf Chie's rough stride. They're only one of the biggest clans in Konoha, said Sasuke, presumably rolling his eyes. Known for their Ninken and red fang facial markings. Neat, Naruto breathed onto Niji's neck. Niji narrowed his eyes against the rush of wind as the trees whipped past and chanced to look sideways at the wolf Uki. Hinata-sama, predictably, looked terrified, clinging to Tamari's waist, while a flush of excitement lit Sakura's face with a pink glow. Tamari's face was the most open Niji had ever seen it, eyes wide despite the sting of the wind, an elated smile tugging at the edges of her mouth. He glanced away before she looked over. Sans Kemp was hidden in the far corner of a hollow between cliffs, reachable by a system of caves in the craggy mountainside. Make yourselves at home, invited San, once the Niji had slid rather gracelessly from the wolf Chie's back. Chie can show you where the river is, if you need more water. San, called Heitake from the lip of the hollow, and jerked his head back toward the caves. The masked shinobi and his team had shadowed the wolves through the forest until the thick undergrowth gave way to tall, scraggly trees, just out of sight. Are you leaving us here? Tamari asked, slipping lightly from the wolf Uki's back. Just while we secure the perimeter, said Heitake. If you run into trouble, Bull will keep you safe. Niji turned to give the Ninken, sprawled gingerly in the center of the clearing, a dubious once-over. When he turned back, Heitake and San had vanished. Great, Tamari muttered, reaching up to help Hinata down. She sighed and surveyed the clearing, planting her hands on her hips absently. All right. Niji, find a vantage point and keep lookout. Gaara, dig a fire pit. Naruto and Sai, get water. Sasuke and Hinata, firewood. Sakura, help me with the food. The children scattered. Niji glanced around the clearing and beelined for the hollow's walls. Concentrating his chakra, he took 2 steps straight up the rocky wall, then 2 more before his foot slipped. Instinctively, he slapped his open hand against the wall and hauled himself the rest of the way to a shallow ledge with a combination of strength and chakra. Once perched atop the ledge, he flipped through the signs and activated his Byakugan, letting the world unfold to his gaze. In the tunnels, the shinobi had convened in a small huddle, the youngest one standing back a couple paces. Niji focused in on the group curiously and watched their mouths move silently, but couldn't make out any words. Disappointed, he examined their chakra, but that was tamped down too tightly, even that of the 2 Ninken, each about the height of Niji's waist, that lounged against the cave walls. He let the chakra color fade and instead switched to heat sight. Little pinpricks of heat birds and mice and other wildlife bloomed in his field of vision. The wolves Uki and Chie, lounging comfortably on either side of the hollow, were the biggest and warmest, then the Ninken bowl meandering after Sasuke and Hinata-sama. Including the wolves, that was 5 Ninken. 1 more was tailing Sai and Naruto to the river. Niji cast his sight further and made out at least 3 others of varying size, scattered around in the tunnels and beyond, in the forest. How many Ninken did this shinobi have? He'd never seen an Inyazuka with more than 2 or 3 dogs. He filed the information away for later consideration. It was full dark and the dried salt jerky soup Temari made with sheets of dried vegetables and also 2 small fish Sai had pulled out of the river with the water was long gone, and the battered aluminum pot it had been and scoured clean by the time any of the shinobi made a reappearance. Heads up, murmured Sakura, squinting past the fire. Niji turned. Shisui had the large sack from their foray into town slung over one shoulder, while at his side, Itaki held a small flame in the palm of his hand to light their way. "You've been busy," Shisui greeted, padding up behind Naruto and letting the sack slide to the ground. "Find everything okay?" "Yes," said Temari, both an acknowledgement and a question. "Well," said Shisui. He glanced sideways at Itaki and carefully sat on a flat rock. After a brief pause, Itaka closed his hand to extinguish the light and followed suit. "I'm told we pulled you out of IWA pretty quickly, and now that we have time, the captain thought it would be a good idea for us to answer some of the questions that you might have." "Who are you?" Temari pounced on the opportunity instantly. Shisui nodded, eyeing her thoughtfully. "As I mentioned earlier, my name is Uchiha Shisui. I'm a former Jounin of Konoha, and currently a member of this team, which is part of a larger group that calls itself," he paused here almost imperceptibly, "Hanabi-ha, the Hanabi faction." "You call it what?" Niji demanded, drowned out by Naruto's much louder, "The what?" as Hinata-sama sucked in a breath. "Why?" asked Temari, an edge to her voice. In the early days following the Sandame's assassination, the prospective heirs to the Uchiha and Hyuga clans went missing, along with the Kyuubigen hierarchy. Itaka took over smoothly. Niji transferred a narrowed eye glare to him. There were suspicions of power-grabbing and blackmail, among others, and many shinobi took exception to attempts to obfuscate the circumstances surrounding the assassination and subsequent events. Hana and Bai as constituents represent our continued dedication to Konoha and Hai no Kuni. In itself, it serves as an accusation of the failings of Konoha's current leadership, and a reminder of what is most important. "And that is?" asked Sakura suspiciously. "You," Itaka said simply. "Konoha's children are its future," added Shisui. "They're to be protected, because one day they'll be protecting Konoha." Hanabi was intended to serve as a reminder of that betrayal. "Though," he added as an afterthought, "we're mostly just called Hanaha these days." "What are your plans for us?" asked Sai, as Temari somewhat incredulously mouthed "children" and "to be protected" silently. Here, Shisui's expression twisted into a shadow of a frown before smoothing out again. "You should be safe in Tetsu for the most part, as long as you stay in Sans Forest. I'm told your previous sensei taught you some basic techniques for fighting and survival. We'll give you more extensive training." "Do you want us to fight for you?" Temari asked bluntly. Shisui and Itaki exchanged a long glance with a silent argument. Itaki narrowed his eyes. "Yes," answered Shisui finally. "But we won't force you to. Nobody in Hanaha fights against their will. We will train you, regardless," said Itaki. "Enough to defend yourselves at the very least." "Cool," said Naruto brightly, because obviously all he'd heard of that was, "We will train you. When do we start?" "We will begin with 1-to-1 matches to gauge your current skill levels," Itaki announced placidly. Niji squinted his eyes against the rising sun and tried not to scowl too much. The night had been restless, even with the ridiculously heavy cloaks Shisui had distributed out in lieu of sleeping bags, and his hair felt gritty from the dust that had accumulated in it. The sleepless week had been hard on them all. Hinata-sama swayed gently on her feet even as she kept her eyes determinedly on Itaki. Even Naruto's eyes were slits, his face puffy and pale. The only one unaffected was Gaara, who never slept anyways. His arms were crossed, however, and his usual glower was pasted firmly on his face. They were in a different gorge this morning, adjacent to San's base camp. All the shinobi had turned up for this San and her wolves perched high up on the walls of the ravine, Hatake leaning against a boulder with his arms crossed next to Shisui, and Momoichi and his silent shadow behind Niji's clump of companions, and Niji was feeling increasingly discomfited at the scrutiny. "We will attempt to match you by your current skill set," Itaka continued. "Temari-san will fight Sai-san. Naruto-san and Sasuke. Niji-san and Hinata-san. Gaara-san." He hesitated, surveying the ragged group. The blood had drained from Sakura's face, and Niji rather agreed with that assessment. Itachi couldn't possibly put a blooded killer against a one-year academy student and expect it to be a fair fight. "And Haku?" growled Momokai from behind. "What?" Niji turned to stare incredulously and wondered if the Nukanin knew what Gaara was. Surely not, if he was willing to put his protege up against him. Beside the swordsman, the one called Haku straightened, lifting his chin a little. Itachi frowned faintly, but despite the shocked silence from Niji's group, none of the other shinobi perched around the gorge raised an objection. He nodded in acquiescence. "Gaara-san will fight Haku-san. Sakura-san, you may fight either Naruto-san or Hinata-san as well." The sand hissed and shifted at their feet. Gaara turned to pin Haku with an unnerving stare. "Come," he commanded. Niji stepped back, shoving Hinata-sama clear. She stumbled, but that was better than getting in between Gaara and his target. Itachi did not seem to share that sentiment, even as the others backed away. Sakura scurried towards Niji while the rest splashed through the shallow river that bisected the gorge to the far wall. Temari lingered for a moment. "Gaara," she said forcefully. The Jinhiraki's glower didn't falter. "Gaara," she snapped, and reluctantly, he turned to her. "No killing," she warned. "You may use whatever weapons or jutsu you please, but cause no permanent damage," Itachi agreed serenely, when Gaara jerked his head in a grudging nod. "Are you ready?" "Gaara-san." "Haku-san." Gaara merely narrowed his eyes in response. Haku stepped forward about 5 meters from Gaara and gave Itachi a firm nod, tucking his hands into his sleeves almost in imitation of Gaara's crossed arms. "Very well," said Itachi, taking several paces back. "The match will proceed until I call it, or until a participant yields. Begin." Almost immediately, Haku's hands came out of his sleeves with a fistful of senbon in each, sending a streak of silver in Gaara's direction. The senbon bounced harmlessly ineffectually off a jagged column of sand that ripped up from the ground in a spray of dirt. A wave of sand crashed after Haku, but the other boy was gone, having begun moving before the senbon left his fingers. Gaara himself made no movement beyond the narrowing of his eyes. "He's fast," Sakura murmured in surprise, as Haku launched another volley of senbon at Gaara's side. That too was batted aside with little effort as the sand gave chase to Haku, who ducked its grasping tendrils and sprinted back towards the river as his hands flashed through a series of seals. Spines of sand burst from the ground at his feet, but he flitted away too quickly for them to strike. "Hihutsu, Sensatsu Suishao," Haku murmured, his voice carrying over the battlefield, and a ring of water rose up from the river to surround the Jinhiraki. Gaara threw up clawed hands crossed before him, and an encircling wall of sand shot up just in time for the hail of water needles to slam into. When he lowered his hands, a dark scowl marred his face and deep pits were scored into his sand. Niji's eyebrows rose, and his eyes darted back to Haku with renewed interest. The boy's face was focused and unruffled, even as he leapt backwards from the mass of sand that slammed inelegantly into the ground in front of him. Another set of senbon coalesced from the river and hurtled at Gaara's back from above, forcing the Jinhiraki to split his attention to block. Another burst of water senbon, another sand shield. Haku's attacks were impressively fast and strong, but not enough to break through Gaara's iron defenses. He seemed to come to the realization at the same time Niji did. "Zabuza-san," he called, darting out of the way of as heavy fist of sand came crashing down. Niji glanced over. The swordsman's arms were folded as he watched the match almost boredly. "Go ahead, kid," he said lazily, and Haku's eyes went flint hard. Niji flinched as the temperature dropped abruptly. Haku flung out a hand and sent a barrage of senbon that froze over midair and went hissing into Gaara's sand shield and came out the other side. Sakura let out a muffled yelp. "Is that ice?" she demanded in a hushed voice, as a second wall of sand shot up just in time to block the projectiles right in front of the Jinhiraki. Niji activated the Byakugan for a better look. Haku's chakra curled around him, an icy blue coursing through his body as the malevolent chakra swelled in Gaara's, oozing through his sand and seeping into the ground around him. "His chakra is the ice," he murmured in disbelief as Haku bounded backwards several paces. "Hihutsu, Makyu Hyushao," Haku breathed, and with a crackle 4 mirrors of ice materialized, 3 about a meter up and tilted towards the ground with Gaara at the epicenter of the triangle, and 1 horizontal above him, effectively caging him in. Warily, Gaara pulled his sand in around him and it seethed at his feet as he considered the mirrors with narrowed eyes. Haku took that moment to make a flying leap straight at the nearest mirror. Niji involuntarily sucked in a breath and forgot to breathe when rather than crashing into the unforgiving ice, the mirror absorbed the shinobi entirely. On each mirror, a reflection appeared, a set of ice senbon materializing in each hand like claws. How Hinata-sama stuttered, eyes wide. "Let's begin," the Hakus all murmured, and hurled their senbon. A dome of sand slammed into place over Gaara as he ducked, both arms over his head, but the hail of senbon flew hard and fast and the sand churned around him desperately when the projectiles breached his outer defenses. Tendrils of sand lashed out like tree branches in the wind, battering uselessly against the mirrors. Niji suddenly realized that the hikeening emitting from the dome was Gaara and getting louder. A wave of sand slammed itself against a mirror with a loud crack, but did not so much as scratch the ice. The flurry of senbon continued uninterrupted. The miasma of Gaara's chakra surged unpleasantly, and the keening gave way to a blood-curdling screech as the sand dome crumbled away from him. Niji jerked back reflexively. Hinata-sama tripped backwards in her haste to get away. He glanced across the river and locked eyes with Temari, whose face had gone bone-white. "Blood!" Gaara howled, enraged and inhuman, as a trickle of blood dripped down his forehead. "Blood!" The senbon stopped abruptly. This time, it was Haku who regarded his opponent warily. "Yes," Gaara muttered to himself, even as the outer edge of his dome crumbled away. "His blood. I'll have his blood." Cracks spider-webbed across his face and arms. Sand swarmed over his body, engulfing half his head with the snarling, fanged visage of a golden-eyed demon. As a familiar wave of killing intent swept over Niji, he wondered why the Hanaha shinobi hadn't stepped in. They were definitely on the alert. Itaka's posture was still relaxed, but the Sharingan spun in both eyes. Shisui and Heitake each had one active as well, and Niji recoiled, momentarily revolted at the sight of the Uchiha Kekki Genkai in the socket normally covered by the Heitake's Hitai-8. An ear-splitting crack drew Niji's attention back to the fight. Gaara's sand demon tail slammed against the ice as sand crawled down his arm in a bulbous parody of armor, shot through with black-tipped spikes and claws. Haku's face froze in a rictus of determination and dismay as he resumed his attack, but now the ice seemed only to annoy the Jinhiriki, sticking in the sand armor. The clawed growth that had sprouted from Gaara's arm lashed upwards with a resounding crash, and the mirror fractured. A second blow sent shards of ice exploding through the air. Haku wasn't throwing just senbon anymore. An crescent-shaped ice blade deflected off Gaara's arm and came spinning at Niji, who fumbled a kunao out to block before Itaka blurred in front of them and batted it to the side. But the ice storm wasn't enough to stop Gaara, who seemed not to care about the cuts that sliced through the sand and through his skin other than to add to his fury. With a snarl, Gaara lashed out in a circle, smashing through all 3 mirrors with claw and sand as if they were truly made of glass. Haku was sent flying backwards, tumbling out of a recently decimated mirror, but turned his fall into a roll in time to leapt out of the way of the sand that crashed after him. He gave up all semblance of finesse and threw blast after blast of raw ice at Gaara, who pounced after him like a rabid, extremely angry wolverine. The blasts deflected off Gaara's sand and left deep craters in the ground with muffled thuds, showering the battlefield with sprays of ice fragments. One blast of ice caught Gaara in the head, driving him back a step. He shook his head as if shaking off water, snarled, and lashed out with his sand. Haku lashed out with his ice and twice caught the tendrils before they could reach him, but the third scored a direct hit that threw him across the clearing. The thing that was Gaara screamed triumphantly and lunged, bringing his sand to bear. And then Itaka was standing there in front of him, calm and implacable. "Enough," he commanded. "This match is over." The Gaara thing clearly was not about to let something trifling like a former umbu keep him from his prey. He slashed a claw through the shinobi, who vanished in a flock of crows, and launched his sand at Haku once again. Haku sent out another desperate blast of ice bringing up a shield that was instantly smashed, and the sand hurled him backwards. The trunk of a tree broke his flight, and he collapsed bonelessly to the ground. A giant blade impaled the ground in front of Haku before the sand could reach him again. "It's over," growled Mamakai, materializing next to his sword, and with a blur of hand seals, the entire contents of the river rose up to form a watery shield in front of the Nukkinen. "Stop," Itake ordered, planting himself between the shield and the Jinhiriki, the Tomo spinning wildly in his eyes. "You will calm down." Gaara clutched at his head with mismatched hands, jerking from side to side as he snarled and muttered wordlessly. The sand floated about him ominously, forming claws and dissipating just as quickly. "Gaara," Temari called from the other side of the riverbed, her voice uncharacteristically shrill and tremulous. "Gaara, you need to control it." For a long, frozen moment, Niji forgot to breathe as the Jinhiriki wrestled with his demon. Abruptly, the sand dropped from the air and from his body, collapsing to the ground with a muted hiss. The golden demon eye winked once and melted away. Gaara, now just a too pale, too thin boy, with exhausted eyes, swayed on his feet in the middle of the carnage left by the battle. The ground was pitted where his sand had driven into the ground, or where Haku's ice blasts had missed their target. Fragments of rock and puddles from melting ice were scattered across the clearing. Several trees were no longer upright, and others sported gaping holes. At the far end of the clearing, Mamakai let the water collapse back into the river. "Not good enough, kid," he muttered, eyeing the battered Haku as he struggled to breath. Niji huffed out an incredulous half-laugh. "Not good enough." The clash of raw power, of two monsters, two titans that easily could have smashed any one of their group into a bloody pulp, was not good enough. He glanced across the river, to where Temari was just reaching Gaara, and caught the same combination of awe, envy, and resolve alongside the concern in her eyes. This is what they wanted to be, monsters on the battlefield. This is how strong they would become. This he knew in his bones. Chapter 5, Zabuza just wants to kill someone, preferably multiple someones. Mission Report, D16. At 1, at 3, ACHN, returned to baseline status. ANHS, continued light fatigue. ACNS, reduced damage to left chest, left upper arm. Injuries bandaged. At 2, at 4, no change, baseline status. Provisions acquired, bread, salted pork, drinking water. Medical supplies acquired, clean linen bandages. At 2, supplies acquired, cloth diapers, powdered milk formula, dried fruit. Location evaluated, security determined to be inadequate due to frequent shinobi traffic. Course set for redacted. Estimated time of departure 1,400 hours. Estimated time of travel 52 hours. End report. Operative Cat 15. "What an ungrateful brat," grumbled Zabuza, looming over his wheezing apprentice. "All those hours of training, and what do you do? Fall on your back when you meet your first Jinhiriki." Haku blinked up at him. "Yes," he agreed with a beatific smile. "Unbelievable." "I don't need your insolence," Zabuza warned, yanking Kubikaraibisho from the ground and slinging it back over his shoulder. "And quit laying around. You're holding everyone up." That wasn't really true. Besides the half-feral wolf girl, the Konohanin were paying much more attention to the Jinhiriki than to Haku. "Hey, Haku," said Zabuza speculatively as his apprentice staggered upright. "How would you feel about becoming a Jinhiriki? Because that kind of power, with Haku's talents? Unstoppable." "It looks uncomfortable, Zabuza-san," Haku said politely, "the little shit." He would do it though, if Zabuza asked. He turned the idea over in his mind and discarded it a little reluctantly. Haku was a rare enough creature as it was, and the tailed beast's a risky investment if he ever heard one. The Suna girl fussed over her Jinhiriki, shepherding him to the far side of the makeshift arena. She would probably mother him for the next 10 minutes. Oh. Nope. She was coming back. Itaka cast a brief glance at her and nodded once. "Nanashi-sai," he called, and the group of kids on the far end of the clearing rustled expectantly. Zabuza leaned back against the trunk of a tree and folded his arms. This match was probably not going to be anywhere near as interesting as the first, but hey, he didn't have anything better to do. At the center of the clearing, the girl drew a kunai from somewhere under her shirt, and the fucking creepy kid with the completely white skin took his place opposite. The boy had a Tonto standard issue, wrapped off white hilt, a little scuffed, which he raised in front of him in a one-handed grip. Zabuza scrutinized him with narrowed eyes. His form was decent enough, functional, but nothing fancy. The girl was poised on her toes, ready to pounce. She would make the first move. "Begin," said Itachi. The girl lunged immediately, bringing up her kunai to parry the boy's defensive slash, and used the momentum to throw herself into a spinning kick at his unprotected side. He ducked, evading the blow, and launched a kick at the girl's legs when she landed. The Suna girl went down, rolling backwards over her shoulder as the boy slashed downwards, and regained her feet in time to catch a second strike on her own blade. Her other hand whipped out another kunai and sent it spinning at the boy, forcing him to disengage and jump out of the way. The girl hurled the first kunai as well, leaping backwards as her hands flashed through a set of seals. "Futon, Repushao," she growled, and clapped her hands together sharply. A block of wood was blasted backwards by the girl's futon, substituted at the last minute as the boy vanished. Alone on the battlefield, the girl narrowed her eyes and drew another kunai. A massive shape erupted from a copse of trees. In a blur of movement, a white and black lion beast straight out of Legends sprang at the Suna girl. "Oh, shit," muttered Zabuza, reluctantly impressed despite himself. After evading its claws on the first lunge, the girl sent a kunai into its side and scattered it into splatters of inky water. "Maybe actual ink." Zabuza frowned in consternation. "Not much of a shelf life on those," he muttered, to Haku, who hummed thoughtfully. The lion beast had bought time for an entire pack of smaller wolf things to stream from the trees, and the Suna girl leapt backwards to keep them from encircling her. If Zabuza squinted a little, they looked an awful lot like an unholy combination of Haytake's biggest ninkin and the wolf girl's wolves. Futon, Daitapa, the Suna girl spat, and the three wolf things in front of her were blasted away. The two still flanking her pounced at the same time. The girl dodged backwards, drawing a kunai in both hands, and hurled one at each. The wolf thing on the right vanished in a smattering of ink, the left in a puff of smoke, and the boy twisted out of the remains of his henge as the kunai streaked past his head. He brought his tanto to bear, and with a clash it met the girl's kunai. The Suna girl batted away a succession of blows, and again was forced to leap backwards. "You are at a disadvantage, Temari," the boy pointed out helpfully. "My tanto has a longer reach." Which he demonstrated, and the girl dodged to the side, deflecting the blade away from her neck. "Shut up, Sai," the girl retorted, blowing scraggly tendrils of hair out of her face. She produced yet another kunai from somewhere on her body, spinning it into a reverse grip, and pounced at him with a cheerfully bloodthirsty grin. "Berserker," he suggested absently to Haku as the girl enthusiastically attempted to separate her friend's arm from his shoulder. "Too cautious," his apprentice disagreed. Zabuza said dismissively. "Maybe when she's older." "That boy, Saikon," Haku trailed off hesitantly, as the boy in question blocked one kunai and twisted out of the way of the other. Zabuza grunted. "Creepy, right? Wonder what Konoha feeds its kids to make something like that. Is there any pigment in his skin?" "I was going to say, seems skilled despite his lack of training," Zabuza-san corrected Haku delicately. "Nothing special," Zabuza said absently, watching critically as the boy swept his blade up to knock a kunai out of the girl's grip and send it spinning across the clearing. "His ink animals are one-hit wonders that he needs time and distance to pull off. Hey, maybe he leeches all the pigment out of his skin for his jutsu." "Sure, Zabuza-san. What a brat. Someone needs to get that girl something to bludgeon things with," Zabuza muttered, as the Suna girl smashed her bare fist into the boy's face, sending him stumbling backwards. "An axe. A mace. Whatever. She'd love it. She has a natural affinity for wind. It would be a shame to waste it," Haku mused. "She's not even using it," Zabuza pointed out. "But I guess as long as she doesn't use ninjutsu, that creepy kid can't use his ink jutsu." The Suna girl slammed the boy in the chest with a brutal kick that sent him skidding out on top of the river in a spray of water. He landed in a three-point crouch, tanto held poised to strike. He leapt back again as the girl chased after him, bounding easily across the top of the water. Instead of darting into the tree cover, the boy whipped around, sweeping his tanto at knee height. The girl leapt up, out of the way, but as soon as her feet left the ground, a pair of inky wolf things burst from the trees, lunging at her from either side. Haku made a small noise of surprise as the Suna girl twisted midair, a kunao in each hand flying true. She caught the boy's wrist as she landed, keeping the tanto inches from her torso. She yanked, sending him stumbling forward, and threw her weight on him. He went down face first, the girl's arm at the back of his neck. "Match," Itaki announced, and the girl stepped away. "That would have worked," the Suna girl said. "I was out of kunao." "I know," the boy replied ruefully, taking her hand and allowing her to haul him upright. "All right, keeping those wolf things in reserve was pretty clever for a kid," Zabuza admitted. "Because he was big enough to do that. As a 10-year-old, his idea of tactics had pretty much been kill them all." Said Haku agreeably. Zabuza slanted a glance at his apprentice. His face was the kind of blank mask he affected when he thought something was funny but was too polite to laugh. Zabuza scowled. "Haku," he growled. Haku glanced up innocently. "Yes, Zabuza-san. You're going to volunteer for middle watch. Every day. For a week." "Hi," said Haku serenely. "And we're doing endurance training," he added pettily. "Yes, Zabuza-san." Zabuza sniffed. The two Hyuga sized each other up in the clearing, poised in identical starting stances. The boy's shoulders were tense and slightly hunched. The girl's face was set in a fierce scowl as the veins spider-webbed angrily across her eyes, the first time Zabuza had seen her look anything short of terrified. It was a good look on her, he approved. "Begin," said Itaki. The girl didn't hesitate, darting forward sure-footedly in time with her clansmen, and met every blow with her own open-handed strikes. It should have looked like an exceptionally bitchy slap fest, except that Zabuza could literally see the chakra that sparked and swirled around them with every clash. The boy was violent grace and sharp movements as he knocked the girl's wrist away from his shoulder and struck out at her head. She ducked aside neatly, and slammed a hand into his chest, knocking him back a couple steps. First contact. The boy's grimace morphed into a silent snarl as he reset his stance. "Your luck will not carry you, Hinata-sama," he warned. The girl's face faltered for an instant before her frown of concentration returned. She made the first move this time, a quick jab that was slapped aside almost derisively, and a second that the boy leaned around at the last second. She spun to the side to avoid his retaliatory strike and deflected his wrist from her abdomen, raw chakra blooming from where their hands impacted. The pair clashed, drew back, and dove in, again and again, sending up bursts of chakra that dissipated as soon as they formed. The boy had a little more height and weight, a little more force behind his movements, but they seemed pretty evenly matched. He lunged in, sensing an opening in the girl's defenses, but the girl's hand came up at the last moment, and each landed a solid blow on the other's chest just below the collarbone. Zabuza heard the audible huff as the air was knocked out of their lungs, and they both stumbled backwards. The girl regarded the boy with a wary stare even as she wheezed for breath, though he seemed inclined to just glare in response, his own chest heaving. "Those eyes are wasted on you if you cannot see what they show you," the boy said coldly, as the girl swayed slightly on her feet. The girl glanced down at her arms, still raised, and her eyes widened. Her head snapped back up to meet the boy's hard stare, tendrils of dread and uncertainty creeping across her face. Zabuza squinted dubiously. "Some kind of genjutsu, maybe?" "He's blocked her tenketsu," murmured Haku, sounding impressed. "Oh, right, Hyuga. They could do that, apparently." The girl faltered, her composure broken. She trembled with effort to keep her stance, her left arm dipped conspicuously. The boy didn't take the opening. His expression was a mask of thinly veiled contempt. "Keep your guard up," he snapped, and the girl jerked her hand back up. The boy struck again, but this time the girl visibly struggled to turn aside his attack, an edge of desperation to her movements. "You," the boy struck, "are fighting a losing battle," he gritted out, "if you don't protect your tenketsu." The girl gave ground rapidly, batting away his attacks until a hard blow to the shoulder sent her skidding to the ground. She coughed, staring up at the boy with one arm raised defensively. Despite the Byakugan, the fear shone through her eyes. "Get up," the boy ordered harshly. "Hey, knock it off, you jerk," the blonde Jinhuriki yelled from across the clearing. Zabuza kind of agreed. The match had taken on a distinctly nasty tone, and a kid with pre-genin skills had no damn business being arrogant. Even if the girl was going to get herself killed the first time she ran into an actual shinobi. You cannot fight her battles, the boy snapped, glaring at the girl. She should not need you to fight her battles for her. The girl scrabbled in the dirt as she struggled to her feet. Her eyes were wild as they fixed on her clansman. The boy, in contrast, stood unmoved, eyes cold. The second she regained her feet, he lashed out again, sending her back to the ground. She staggered upright, narrowly ducking 2 strikes before the third shoved her backwards. "Nnii-san," she gasped. "This is the power of the main house," the boy snarled in reply. "This is what would command me." He prowled forward grimly as the girl backpedaled. Ah, this was some clan shit. Thank the gods he never had to deal with that. Perks of being a breeding program baby. "Stand your ground," the boy demanded, but the girl skittered backwards again. He stopped abruptly, face twisted in an ugly scowl. The girl regarded him warily, panting, arms trembling. "You," he said almost serenely, "are unworthy of the name Hyuga." Zabuza stiffened at the spike of actual killing intent from the kid. "Haku," he growled. His apprentice brought his hands up just as the Hyuga boy lunged, and ice burst up from the ground, tangling around boy's legs. Shisui appeared behind the boy in a flash, grabbing him in a loose headlock as Itaka blurred forward between the 2 Hyuga, one arm outstretched to keep him at bay. Even Hatake stepped out of a shunshin, catching the boy's arm in an iron grasp. "You're done," Hatake said tonelessly, superseding Itaka. "Stand down." The burning fury in the boy's eyes intensified, but his face smoothed into a blank mask. Hatake let him go first, then Shisui stepped back. Haku's ice melted away with a wave of his hand. On either side of the clearing, the children all stood frozen, only their eyes darting between the boy, the girl, and the shinobi. A muscle in the boy's jaw twitched, but he jerked forward in an aborted bow. "I apologize," he ground out. "I was out of line." "Nnii-san," the girl whispered, but the boy turned on his heel and stalked off. "They're all hopeless," Zabuza growled, leaning comfortably on the hilt of Kubikari Basho. "The Tsunajin hierarchy's a loose cannon, his sister has no sense of strategy, that ink boy is fucking creepy, the Hyuga boy has some sort of fucked up family grudge he can't keep off the battlefield, the Hyuga girl is weaker than a wilted flower, Uchiha's brother has less than 1/10 of his talent. The Konohajin hierarchy can't do anything but get back up after getting hit, and the girl with the ridiculous hair can't fight for shit. If this is the future of Konoha, they're delusional." "I don't think that the fact that you find Saikun creepy means he isn't skilled," Haku said delicately. "I thought they fought rather well, considering they haven't had consistent training." "I don't keep you around to think, Haku," Zabuza snipped. "One of us has to, Zabuza-san." "The impudence." Zabuza rolled his eyes. "All right, genius, what do you think then? Garakun has great power, even if his control is a little rough. Saikun has a keen mind for tactics and a good foundation with both his ink jutsu and kenjutsu. Tamari-san is strong and has fast reflexes, and perhaps an affinity for wind-natured jutsu. Niji-kun," he hesitated briefly, "is already quite skilled in his family's techniques, and Hinata-chan showed great perseverance. Suzuki-kun already mastered several katon and basic taijutsu and shows potential to develop both further. Naruto-kun has a lot of stamina and a lot of chakra to spare, and Sakura-chan has great chakra control, given that she was able to stay on top of the water for a substantial part of her match." "You're too nice, Haku," Zabuza dismissed. "Washouts, all of them. No sense of discipline." He could feel Haku silently, politely disagreeing beside him. For a moment, they watched the wannabe shinobi kids patching up their grievances with food, like good wannabe shinobi kids. "Mamakai, mission," Hatake said curtly, stalking past and flicking a scroll in his direction. Zabuza caught it instinctively and glared at the man's retreating back. He flicked the scroll open, then shut it just as quickly. The Hanaha shinobi, minus the wolf girl who had long since vanished into the forest to do whatever wolf girls did, clustered in one huddle by the smoldering fire. Zabuza scowled at that, because, again, they didn't invite him to their little strategy powwow. "Go make something to eat," he ordered Haku abruptly, yanking his sword up from where he'd stuck it in the ground. Zabuza really couldn't care less about the whole Hanaha affair, don't get him wrong, he appreciated the whole coup thing, but by the gods he was chafing at both the authority and lack of authority. They didn't trust him to do anything important, so they sent him around with a chaperone or on independent information gathering trips where he didn't have to get ordered around but also didn't get to kill, maim, or even lightly injure anyone. He really didn't like Reed, fucking hated people telling him what to do. But if Zabuza ever wanted to do something useful and preferably bloody, he was going to have to knuckle under and suck it the fuck up. He'd waited for a year, he was done biding his time. He slung his sword back over his back and stalked over to where the three had convened by the fire. Heitake stopped talking as he approached, but that was fine. Shisui regarded him with open curiosity and the Uchiha kid looked like a fucking stone as usual, but Zabuza ignored them. You know what, he snapped. I'm tired of you treating me like some grunt career Chunin from the General Corps. I was an Umbu captain and a swordsman and you're wasting my skills on these goddamned courier missions. Don't you fucking cut me out of the loop. Heitake looked like he would interrupt, but Zabuza steamrolled right over him. If this is about my loyalty, he spat, you already have it. Don't make me say this again, sir. A life was saved, so a life is owed. I'm with you to the death. If you want me to wear your fucking colors, I'll wear your fucking colors. Rant over, he crossed his arms and scowled at Heitake, who stared back at him blankly. In his periphery, Shisui's eyes were wide, brows raised. I'll keep that in mind, Heitake said at last, after an uncomfortably long pause. We're done here. He gave them all a nod, with one last look at Zabuza, before striding off. Silently, with a glance between the two, Itaka slipped off as well. Zabuza growled under his breath and slouched, scruffing a hand through his hair. So, Shisui dragged the word out. Zabuza side-eyed him suspiciously. Would you really have worn his Heno Moji? Zabuza stared at him incredulously. His what? Like, a bandana with a cute little scarecrow face. What the fuck, Zabuza snapped, scowling. I'm not his fucking dog. Shisui pasted an innocent expression on his face. You just said you'd wear his colors. Zabuza recoiled. I meant that idiotic little swirl you call a leaf, he snapped. Oh, said Shisui unconvincingly. Zabuza glared. Did you know, the Uchiha continued blithely, that in Tetsu, when they go to battle, samurai often wear a token from their beloved. Zabuza whipped out a handful of kunao. I don't owe shit, Konoha, he growled, and pounced. All in all, Zabuza reflected, after scraping together the tattered remnants of his masculinity via a rousing half-hour of attempting to impale Shisui, a successful venture. He was about 80% sure that Heitake got the message now, so at least he could lay off the boss thing. Gods, weren't shinobi supposed to be good at all that subtlety shit? Not that it had been very subtle. Maybe that was the problem. Too fucking unsubtle for Heitake to comprehend. Zabuza-san, Haku greeted, standing up to pass him a bowl of stew. Zabuza sniffed it cautiously. Is this squirrel? He demanded, crouching down next to the fire. Yes, Haku said serenely, but his eyes were apologetic. Dahei and Guriko brought them back. I know you find them, distasteful. I hate squirrel, Zabuza grumbled. So fucking stringy. Oh, just eat it, you big baby, drawled Shisui, perched carelessly atop a pile of boulders with his own bowl of stew. He glared, hand twitching instinctively for Kubikari Basho. Shisui just raised an eyebrow in his free hand inoffensively. Gods, he hated squirrel. And squirrely little Konoha shinobi who wouldn't stand still and let him hit them. He stabbed half-heartedly at a chunk of meat. Where's the walking statue? He growled. Shisui's other eyebrow went up, half hidden behind his hitaiate. Talking to Sasuke, trying to catch up, he answered, motioning vaguely towards the second fire, with its small pile of children. Except, he's not too used to the Sasuke that's been a fugitive in the minor lands the past 2 years. He paused. Or, well, the other way around too. Zabuza shrugged dismissively. Builds character. They have something to bond over. Shisui cut an incredulous glance at Haku, who blinked tolerantly. You ever think that your idea of bonding is a little strenuous? I don't bond, Zabuza sniffed. I exterminate. What the fuck? He saw the Uchiha mouth, and bit down a smirk. How long are you hanging around this time? Shisui asked instead, clearly choosing to disregard the enlightening philosophy Zabuza had deigned to share. Heading out tomorrow morning to check the dead drop in Hinokuni, Zabuza grunted. No, you're not, corrected Hatake, ghosting up behind them. Change of plans. I'm going to the dead drop. The rest of you will guard the children. Haku, send Itake here and watch them. Hi, said Haku, turning away after a brief look at Zabuza. Zabuza exchanged a glance with Shisui, fingers itching for Kubikuri Basho. He had a bad feeling about this. Itake slipped out of the shadows by Shisui's side, a pensive set to his face that smoothed into emotionlessness in the blink of an eye. I'll make this brief, said Hatake. For the foreseeable future, the children will be divided into groups based on their strengths or needs, and each of you will be in charge of teaching a group. Itake, he directed. You are assigned to Gaara, Hinata, and Sai. Focus on training them in stealth. Concealment. Hi, replied Itake, a slight frown marring his face. Zabuza, you will have Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura, a strength-based team. Shisui, you will teach Temari, Neji, and Haku. Back the fuck up. Hold on, Zabuza snapped. That's my apprentice. I would like to be the one to train my brother, Itake interjected. Perhaps we could. Hatake held his hand up, and Itake's mouth clicked shut like a demmed puppet. Zabuza snorted derisively. Hatake's eye snapped to Zabuza, who sneered back and tried very hard to think about playing a good little soldier for the sake of a nice, bloody massacre down the line. You don't think Haku has anything to learn from Shunshin no Shisui? Hatake challenged coolly. From the corner of his eye, Shisui's gaze darted towards him and away. Fuck. Zabuza clenched his jaw and didn't respond. You just reunited with Sasuke for the first time in 2 years, Hatake fired at Itake next. Now is not the time to treat him as a subordinate. Itake hesitated, but dipped his head in acquiescence. Wow, look at that. Their own little rebellion quashed in a record 15 seconds. Zabuza scowled and crossed his arms. The most annoying part about the whole thing was that Hatake was right, at least about the teaching assignments. Haku did have a lot to learn, and speed-based attacks were Shisui's forte, not his. Zabuza's own fighting style leaned heavily towards physical strength and ninjutsu, which at least the Konoha Jinchuriki and the Uchiha Kid matched, and Itake's stint in Umbu had given him extensive training in stealth and espionage. The pink-haired girl, though good thing she was a spare. Zabuza didn't think any amount of training could get her through her first battle without getting her skewered. I think it goes without saying, but you are in charge of their safety, not just their training, said Hatake, pinning them each in turn with a hard stare. This is a great responsibility. You can consider them candidates for Genin at this point. Responsibility. Genin, Kami. There was a fucking reason Zabuza took an apprentice. Haku had basically sprung out of a river, dumpster, fully formed and ready to fight. But 3 half-trained brats who probably learned a shitload of bad habits? He didn't sign up for this. He eyed Hatake resentfully, because no way that fucker didn't know what he'd just done. Zabuza'd gotten his damned wish, he was part of the club now, and thanks to that he got slapped with indefinite babysitting duh. And he couldn't even complain because Shisui and Itake were in the same boat. Fuck. Really backed himself into a corner there. Zabuza glared stonily. 3 sets of eyes peered back with varying degrees of venom. I am Mamakai Zabuza. Former Jounin, former Umbu, in your bingo books as the demon of the hidden mist, he announced stonily. My name's Uzumaki Naruto, and I. Zabuza resisted the urge to rub away the burgeoning headache. Gods, why was this kid's voice so shrill? That's great, I don't give a damn, he interrupted. I'm here to keep you from killing yourselves, not to care about you. The Uchiha Kid glowered. The Jinchuriki looked incredibly offended for all of 5 seconds before visibly switching gears. Are you going to teach us super cool jutsu? He demanded. Zabuza laughed, muffled beneath the bandages swatting his lower face. You're miles away from doing cool jutsu, brat. Learning new techniques is only useful if you can stay alive long enough to use them. He pointed at the Uchiha brat. You are weak. He jabbed a finger at the Jinchuriki, can't fight for shit. He turned his glare on the girl. And you are useless. Uchiha Itachi was an Umbu captain at 13. Uchiha Shisui was a feared jounin by 11, Heitake by 10. Hell, Shisui and Heitake were on the battlefield at age 5. He sneered at the trio of children glaring back at him with a mixture of defiance and anger. As far as I'm concerned, you three are so far behind, you may as well dig your own graves now. What were you doing when you were 5? The Jinchuriki piped up. Zabuza grinned beneath the bandages, slow and derisive. When I was 5, I slaughtered 108 genin hopefuls twice my age in the span of a couple hours. He surveyed their expressions with a grim satisfaction. The Jinchuriki's eyes widened. The shadow of fear lurked in the Uchiha brats. The blood drained from the girl's face, leaving her bone white. Why, the girl managed to whisper, would you do that? Desperation. Anger. Resolve. Zabuza shrugged a shoulder carelessly and let the emotions of the past slide away. To test the limits of my abilities, he said blandly. That's bullshit, the Jinchuriki bust out. The girl shot him a scandalized glare, but he continued obliviously. Nobody just murders a bunch of kids for some stupid reason like that. Zabuza hunkered down, because apparently step 1 was a history lesson. Do you brats know why Kirigakure is known as the Bloody Mist? They all shook their heads. Zabuza ticked the list off his fingers. Kekkai Genkai purges. Public executions. Lynching mobs. And the final academy graduation test, killing another genin candidate. He chuckled mirthlessly at their horrified expressions. You'll find a lot of senseless killing in Kiri. The brats were watching him warily now. Good. A little fear was good for them. The rest of that particular lesson could wait for another day. He bared his teeth in a mockery of a smile. Now you know the standards I expect from you. I don't buy into that Konoha touchy-feely bull crap. If you can't cut it, tough shit. That's on your head. He surveyed their expressions. Anger? Check. Fear? Check. Defiance? Check. Excellent. He jabbed a finger towards the trees, and the girl flinched. Run, he ordered. The trio glanced at each other hesitantly. Zabuza rolled his eyes. What, do you need better motivation? He flipped through the signs almost casually, and the Uchiha brat tensed. He was slightly more intelligent than the other two, then but not smart enough. Beside him, a Mizu Bunshin rose from the ground in a crouch, leering at the brats maliciously. My Bunshin will keep you company. Try not to get skewered. For how long? Demanded the girl, giving the clone an alarmed glance. Zabuza shrugged. Until I tell you to stop. The clone twirled a kunao in one hand, then hurled it at their feet. All three jumped backwards. The Jinchuriki tripped with startled yelps. Run, Zabuza repeated, and the three took off with a little encouragement from another water kunao. Satisfied, Zabuza watched them disappear into the forest, his Bunshin loping behind easily. That should keep them occupied for a good hour or two, or until he figured out what the fuck he was supposed to do with them. At least now he'd get some peace and quiet. How goes it? Said Shisui in his ear. Zabuza barely managed to suppress a flinch. He turned his head to glare at the younger shinobi. Shisui lounged back against a nearby tree. Well. Zabuza shook his head. They're insubordinate, undisciplined, and completely hopeless, not to mention soft. Yeah, they're not dead yet, but they're no shinobi. Shisui snorted. Kmin, Z. They haven't had much training, you can't expect them to already know how to fight. You can't tell me Haku did. Haku was 5, snapped Zabuza, bristling, and he had already spilled blood. That was an accident, he didn't actually know how to fight, Shisui pointed out dryly. Besides, he had you to teach him afterwards. These kids learn too. Zabuza grunted dismissively. Where is Haku, anyways? Why aren't you with your brats? Clone, said Shisui, pushing off languidly from the trunk of the tree. They're just running some drills, nothing I really need to be there in person for. You clone, Zabuza agreed. Anyways, I was thinking, Shisui continued. Hunting's probably good training for the kids, so we could all switch off taking care of dinner. Teiko sent off most of the Ninken last night, and we can't really ask San to feed all 12 of us. Zabuza shrugged. Sure, fine. Great, Shisui said brightly. I'll go tell Ataki. You can do the first day. Later, Z. Hold the fuck up, Zabuza snarled, whirling to grab for Shisui's collar. Konoha. But Shisui vanished in a swirl of leaves in a two-fingered salute. What the actual fuck? Zabuza glowered, glaring in the direction he'd gone. Whatever. At least he wouldn't have to figure out how to train the brats until tomorrow. He slouched back and unslung Kubikari Basho from its harness. May as well give it a good polish while he had the time. Gods, why couldn't he have waited until after they'd foisted off the brats onto someone else to make his fucking declaration of loyalty? At least when he was running messages, he only had Haku with him. He did trust Shisui enough not to screw him over, though. Now that was a kid with a good head on his shoulders, a head that was worth somewhere in the realm of 40 million Ryu according to the Kiri Bingo book. In the shinobi world, when it came to speed, it was Uchiha Shisui, even though he'd disappeared before ever reaching his prime. Zabuza would have to be a fool not to let Haku learn from him. Zabuza examined his blade critically. It showed no signs of wear and tear, but instead shone smooth and sharp as the day it had been forged. Satisfied, he hefted it back over his shoulder and tucked the cleaning cloth back in his pocket. He surveyed the empty forest, then sauntered off in the direction his clone had chased the brats. He was probably going to need the whole rest of the day to make them catch dinner, they were just so loud. His scowl deepened as the undergrowth crackled ahead of him. Yeah, he was going to have to beat that out of them or something. How the fuck do you escape an enemy if they can hear where you're going? Right on cue, the Uchiha whelp came crashing out of the bushes, face flushed with exertion. Stop, said Zabuza. The brat yelped and promptly hurled a kunao at his face. Zabuza snatched it out of the air and lavered the little bastard with a thunderous glare. Sorry, the boy offered grudgingly, as the Jinhyuriki stumbled out of the undergrowth. The girl trailed him, tottering on quivering legs like a baby goat. Zabuza tossed the kunao at the Uchiha's feet and let the Mizu Bunshin dissolve into a puddle. I hope you are warmed up now, he said, crossing his arms over his chest. We would probably start the actual training at this point, the girl mouthed actual training incredulously, but today you get to kill something for dinner, or all of you an entire little gang of hellspawn go hungry tonight. The Jinhyuriki opened his mouth. What do we? Step 1, Zabuza interrupted. Be quiet. But by the gods, the kid didn't know when to quit. Zabuza snapped his fingers at the blonde. That means shut up. Thankfully, the kid shut his mouth, though he glared furiously at Zabuza. Step 2, said Zabuza. Pick something to eat. Rabbit, said the Uchiha, tucking away his kunao. Fish, suggested the girl. Ramen, crowed the Jinhyuriki. In Mizu no Kuni, there was a string of islands to the south of Kirigakure with clean, white sand, gentle waves rollicking at the shores, and a smattering of leafy palm trees. Zabuza wished he was there right at that instant so a coconut could fall from those gently waving ferns and brain him so that he wouldn't have to deal with this tiny moron. Idiot, the girl elbowed the Jinhyuriki sharply. You can't hunt ramen. Rabbit, great, said Zabuza insincerely, beginning to realize that selective hearing could, in fact, be the answer here. Step 3, find your prey. He stared at the brats expectantly. They stared back cluelessly. Zabuza rolled his eyes and gestured vaguely at the trees. Where are you going to find a rabbit? They all shuffled a bit. The girl darted nervous glances at the other brats and at Zabuza. Somewhere with water, she said hesitantly. We could set up snares near a river, like Nico-sensei showed us. Thank fuck this mysterious sensei at least kind of knew what she was doing, because Zabuza sure as hell didn't. River, yes, snares, no. He crossed his arms across his chest. We're hunting today, not trapping. It's easier to catch small animals with a trap, the Uchiha brat objected. And you said we have to feed 8 of us. Yeah, see, I don't really care if you eat or not. Zabuza shrugged dismissively. Kill the thing with your own power or starve. That's stupid, the Jinhuriki protested. You're stupid. Naruto, hissed the girl, giving the brat a good sock to the shoulder. Do not maim the brat. Do not kill the brat. Do not chop the brat into tiny, squishy pieces. When you kill me, Zabuza gritted out, you can make your own rules. Now go find a dem rabbit. The Uchiha brat once again proved he had at least one brain cell by turning decisively off into the trees, leaving his little friends no choice but to follow or be left alone with Zabuza. They chose the former. And step quietly, he snapped. Rabbits can not only hear you, they can feel you stomping towards them. Did they even know where the river was? No, they didn't. Go west, Zabuza finally growled at them, after letting them blunder through the woods for a good half hour, if you ever want to find running water. Why didn't you tell us earlier, the Jinhuriki complained. Your incompetence is not my responsibility, Zabuza sneered, before realizing that it was, in fact, kind of his responsibility. Fucking hey-take. He gritted his teeth. All of you stop, he ordered, and take a look around instead of running around like headless chickens. The brats glanced around warily. The Jinhuriki shuffled a little. Water runs downhill, he said, very slowly. More green leafy plants grow near water. Humidity is higher. Most importantly, you can hear the water running, which is why rule number 1 is be quiet. The Jinhuriki stopped moving. I hear it, he said, eyes wide. Let's go. Quietly, added the girl, with a flickering glance at Zabuza. Thank the gods. The Uchiha brat took the lead, which was good because he was the quietest. Zabuza trailed them by a half a dozen meters. They were on the right track. He could pick out the hints of paw prints all around as they approached the stream. The first time they passed a rabbit, absolutely nothing happened. The creature crouched frozen in the bushes as the brats stalked right past and kept on going. Zabuza glanced disbelievingly between the rabbit and the brats, but not one of the brats so much as blinked in its direction. And then they passed another. And another. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered under his breath. He doubled back on silent feet, where a rabbit nibbled obliviously on a leaf. He gave it a narrow-eyed stare, because he definitely didn't see what was so stealthy about it. If they weren't going to get it. He snapped out a kunai and slashed the thing's throat before it had a chance to so much as twitch. Then he shrugged and went back for another. No reason why he shouldn't eat even if the brats went hungry. The brats had finally caught sight of a particularly large rabbit crouched among the roots of one of a tree, its pelt patchy and mottled with only half of its winter coat grown in. Zabuza ghosted up next to them, and when they turned to look at him, raised an eyebrow and jerked his head towards the animal. The Jinhuriki pulled out a kunai with an almost ostentatious flourish. The Uchiha nudged him with an elbow, and while the boys were distracted with their silent squabble, the girl pulled out a kunai, took careful aim, and threw. It soared fast and sure, and impaled itself in the trunk of the tree 10 centimeters from the rabbit's bobtail. The rabbit's head snapped up and in a flash of brown and white, darted away through the bushes. In unison, the 3 children turned to look at Zabuza guiltily with wide eyes, the boys squabbling forgotten. Zabuza resisted the overwhelming urge to close his eyes and pinch the bridge of his nose. He settled for breathing in deeply. Clearly we skipped a step, he growled. Learn how to fucking aim. The brats followed meekly as he led them back uphill, for once quiet and subdued. He stopped at the top of the ridge, and grimaced at the ragtag brats clustered behind him. All right, he said, and slashed an X into the trunk of a tree. Stand back there. Each of you get 5 tries. Jinhuriki, you're first. Don't call me that, the blonde kid cried. My name's Naruto. Did I hurt your feelings? Zabuza sneered. Although, he reflected, advertising that the kid was a Jinhuriki was probably not a great idea. Just throw the demmed kunai. Or do you not know how? The Jinhuriki glowered. I'm really good at throwing kunai, he retorted, and hurled a blade at the target. It sailed past the tree entirely and vanished into the undergrowth. Zabuza raised a condescending eyebrow as the Jinhuriki's ears turned red. Stupid kunai, the Jinchuriki muttered, as the girl slapped a hand over her eyes. The Uchiha sighed through his nose. He threw a second, and it stuck in the trunk of the tree. His third and fourth hit halfway along the X. The last missed, sinking into the trunk above the target. Zabuza grunted. "Great," he said facetiously. "Mini Uchiha, you're next." The boy pulled a handful of kunao out from under his shirt and hurled each of them, one after the other in rapid succession. All 5 clustered tightly at the intersection of the target. Said Zabuza, with grudging approval. "Now you, girl." The girl stepped forward and set her feet determinedly. She took a breath and spun a kunao absently in her hand. Her first blade went wide, but the next 3 thudded in just above and to the right of the Uchihas. The last hit just above the target. She bit her lip, eyes darting to Zabuza apprehensively. "All right," said Zabuza. "You, boy, you're coming with me. You two stay here and keep practicing until you can hit the middle of the target 5 times out of 5. "What?" the Jinchuriki protested. "Why does Sasuke get to go with you?" "Because he has at least a chance of hitting a rabbit if he sees one," Zabuza growled. "Or do you want your little pack of hellions to starve?" The brat opened his mouth again, but the girl slapped her hand over his mouth. "No, we'll practice," she said quickly, and then snatched it back when the Jinchuriki brat licked her palm. "Get to it," said Zabuza dismissively, already turning away, then paused. "Girl, you're letting go of your kunao too early." Connie." "It's Naruto," the brat shrilled. "You're using the wrong muscles and your form isn't stable. Ask the girl to help you." He eyed them both then gave a mental shrug. "We'll be back in an hour, if you're better by then you can come for round 2. "How long are we hunting?" the Uchiha brat asked, eyeing Zabuza warily. "Until you catch enough or until the sun goes down." Zabuza smirked as the Jinchuriki's stomach growled, as if on cue. "And don't try to sneak any food while we're gone," he added. "The consequences will be unpleasant." "What?" the Jinchuriki shrilled, but Zabuza ignored him, stalking off between the trees. Gods, he hated kids. Especially loud kids. Okay, so the Uchiha brat wasn't so bad. He moved cautiously for the most part, and more importantly, he was quieter than the other 2. He was just about as observant as the other brats, though. Zabuza slapped the back of his head lightly and pointed at the bundle of fur nibbling on grass at the edge of a clearing when the Uchiha turned to glare. The boy's shoulders hitched up towards his ears a little when he spotted the rabbit, but he slid a hand under his shirt and produced a kunao. 1 heartbeat, 2 and he sent the blade spinning towards the animal and caught it in the flank as tried to flee. The boy sprang out of hiding, and with a second kunao, tore its neck almost clean in 2. Zabuza grunted, unimpressed, as the boy picked up the rabbit by its ears. "Aim for the head next time." Unfortunately, quiet didn't mean mute, and the brat's Uchiha blood didn't give him his brother's near-silent demeanor. Ahead of him, prowling with careful steps over a fallen tree, he asked, "Why are you working with my brother? Why did you leave Kirigakure?" His knee-jerk response was "None of your damned business," closely followed by "Fuck off." But Itaka's newly rediscovered protective brother instincts would activate, and he'd probably stick Zabuza in a genjutsu that was physically harmless but honestly pretty traumatic while he himself would be forced to retaliate with severely debilitating injuries. "Zabuza, put the sword down." "But I owe a life debt" was a little too personal and for shits and giggles too flippant. If he gave the kid some kind of explanation maybe he'd convince the other 2 to actually follow orders. Right. "I tried to assassinate the Mizukage," he decided to say, and belatedly realized just how he might have fucked that up. The boy froze. Narrowed eyes darted at Zabuza, suddenly wary. Zabuza grimaced. "He's a piece of shit." "What did I just tell you about the bloody mist?" he pointed out, pretty reasonably. "You think a man who encourages all that to happen is as goody-goody as your tree-hugging chieftain." "Does my brother know about this?" the boy demanded, eyes flickering back in the direction of the camp. Zabuza snorted. "Boy, every shinobi in a village with a bingo book knows this. It's not exactly a secret." The boy scowled, but hopped lightly off the fallen tree. "And working with Kon Hanabi ha? Damn. So much for avoiding that part." Haytake is honorable, he admitted grudgingly. And what he's doing with Hanaha is, understandable. What do you get out of it? I dunno, citizenship, or whatever, Zabuza hedged. Look, boy, just hunt your goddamned dinner. After one miss, followed by one clean kill, Zabuza herded the Uchiha brat back to where they'd left his friends. The girl, mid-throw, nailed the center of the X with a solid thunk. Yeah, Sakura-chan, the Jinhuriki cheered, to the girl's bashful smile. 4 more, Zabuza ordered, and the girl jumped at his voice. The Jinhuriki yelped and clutched at his heart. Hi, stuttered the girl, and fumbled another kunao from the pile at her feet. Zabuza watched critically as each blade embedded themselves into the abused tree trunk, each only centimeters from the next. Zabuza grunted. You hanpin. Naruto, the Jinhuriki yelled. Sure, whatever, he grumbled, and waved a hand at the target. And to his surprise, the Jinhuriki managed to land each kunao on that tree. But although the first 4 did hit the target, the last tipped, sticking crookedly to the side of the trunk. The brat's eyes darted to Zabuza's face, and he bit his lip apprehensively. Well, he was impressed, considering the improvement the Jinhuriki had managed to make in just an hour, but a rule was a rule. Girl, you'll come with us. Sasa, tough luck. Keep practicing. The Jinhuriki, too distracted to even correct Zabuza, he was pretty sure he'd gotten the brat's name wrong again, whined, that's not fair. I almost had it. A shinobi doesn't care about fair, Zabuza said dismissively. And if you don't come into battle with 100% confidence in your skills, you'll die painfully. Not to mention immediately. And embarrassingly. I can do it, the Jinhuriki insisted. Just give me another chance. You had a full hour to practice, said Zabuza. More, actually. Come on, the Jinhuriki whined, and Zabuza was tempted to give in just because the brat was so loud, and twice as annoying. He is doing pretty good, the girl piped up, and blinked innocently when his glare turned on her. Yeah, the Uchiha brat chimed in unexpectedly, and Zabuza rolled his eyes. Fine, he growled, just to get them all to shut up. We're going to eat lunch. You can choose to either eat or practice. And if you can't do it by then, you get to do target practice until the sun goes down. Fine, the Jinhuriki scowled, and stomped over to the tree. Zabuza dug through his back pouch and pulled out a couple of wrapped ration bars. He tossed one to each of the brats and opened one for himself. The girl peered at hers cautiously, while the boy peeled his open with only slight hesitation. Zabuza absently mused that it could have been a wonderful opportunity in training awareness for poisoning, if he'd thought of it ahead of time. The girl took a bite and made such horrified grimace that Zabuza wondered if the bar had been poisoned after all. What is this? She sputtered. It's a ration bar, grunted the Uchiha brat, gnawing at the end of his. Shinobi take them on long-term missions when they won't have time to get food. I know what a ration bar is, the girl muttered, but why does it taste like cardboard and wet paint? They're not made for taste. The Uchiha couldn't hide his own disgusted shudder at the flavor. Zabuza laughed. You get used to it, he assured them reassuringly. He threw the last piece of bar into his mouth and crumpled the wrapper back into his pouch. Hey, brat. Satsuma. Naruto, the Jinhuriki insisted. Yeah, that. You get one shot at 5 bullseyes. Let's see it, he ordered. Yeah, the Jinhuriki cheered. I got this, you'll see. And to Zabuza's everlasting surprise, every single kunao hit the center of the target. Finally, the girl sighed, waving her empty wrapper at the Jinhuriki. The Uchiha brat just snorted. Typical, he muttered. Great, said Zabuza unenthusiastically. Let's go, we're burning daylight. Mini Uchiha, take point. Go 2 kilometers past the river, or you won't find anything bigger than a mouse. And for God's sake, don't make a racket. Why were children so slow? Going at this crawl was frankly exhausting. How did they get anywhere? Didn't they get bored? And yet not so fast, he said, as the girl and Jinhuriki stood back from the Uchiha brat, who had a kunao heft in one hand. Each of you need to catch at least one rabbit before we head back or I'm taking those." He pointed at the rabbits dangling from the Uchiha's belt, "and you all get to go hungry." "What?" demanded the Uchiha brat, outraged, loud enough that the rabbit he'd been stalking startled at his voice and, well, rabbit. Zabuza crossed his arms. "Ha! Take that," the Jinhuriki jeered, honest to God sticking his tongue out at the other boy. The girl looked torn between relieved and guilty. "Better teach them well," Zabuza warned, "if you want to eat tonight." The boy glared at him with such venom that it was almost intimidating. Like how baby sharks were kind of intimidating. Or, you know, cute in a toothy kind of way. Maybe in a couple years, when he unlocked those freaky swirly eyes. Zabuza gave him an insincere smile beneath the bandages. With bad grace, the Uchiha brat turned to his companions with a glower. The Jinhuriki sneered back, while the girl offered him a hesitant smile. Zabuza leaned back smugly to watch the show. The Uchiha, the civilian girl, and the Jinhuriki, it sounded like the beginning of a bad joke, had managed to pull it together long enough to bag at least one rabbit each. Another 3 hours of painstaking instruction had seen the brats create an edible if very rudimentary stew. And now, Zabuza was free of those little hellions for the rest of the night. His nerves were about as close to frayed as they would ever get, and that was after just one day with the brats. He unslung the broadsword from his back, resting it across his knees, and rummaged through his pouch for a cleaning cloth. He ran the cloth over the flat of the blade methodically, letting the familiarity of the movement soothe him. On the other side of the fire sat Haku, cross-legged, with a needle in one hand and a pile of torn clothes in his lap. Haku was much better company. Much quieter. He eyed his apprentice over the fire and the remains of their own rabbit stew. Too quiet. Something was up. "You're quiet today." Zabuza frowned at his apprentice, absently running the cloth over his sword. "Oh." Haku responded politely, but didn't look up from the haori he was mending. "Spit it out, kid," drawled Zabuza, hand stilling on his blade. Haku pursed his lips, but said nothing. "Haku. That's an order," he growled, eyebrows knitting together in warning. He set Kubikaraibasho down, giving his apprentice his full attention. Still the kid hesitated. "Zabuza-san," he said at last. Are you displeased with my work?" Zabuza blinked, nonplussed. "Am I, what?" "I lost the match against Gara-kun," said Haku, eyes downcast, "and now I'm working with Shisui-san, and you have those 3. "Hold on," said Zabuza. "Children to train, and I made that squirrel stew even though I know you hate." "Shut up for a second, Haku," interrupted Zabuza, still trying to figure out where all of this was coming from. It wasn't like his apprentice to be insecure. "I don't care that you lost a sparring match against a Jinhuriki, and training those 3 brats was not my idea." Haku still wasn't looking up. Zabuza suppressed a sigh. "You're working with Shisui because he can teach you more than I can." "What is Uchiha Shisui known for?" "His incredible combat speed," Haku answered automatically. "And his shunshin." "And what is your most basic advantage, with the Hayaton?" Zabuza prompted. "Speed," his apprentice answered. "Yeah, see." Zabuza shrugged. "The girl's nothing special, and the Uchiha boy? We've got 2 of them already. The Jinhuriki is too loud, uncoordinated, and doesn't know shit. But you're something else. An instinctive grasp of chakra manipulation, innate control of your Kekkei Genkai, shinobi discipline. You're the most useful apprentice I could have right now." The boy peered up at him. "You mean that, Zabuza-san?" Zabuza grunted and sliced open his palm on his sword, smoothing the blood that welled up into the metal. "Just don't go trying to feed me squirrel again," he warned gruffly. "If the dogs want it, let the dogs have it." "Hi," said Haku, his cheerfulness back in spades. Zabuza watched him critically. Maybe spending all this time with Konoha Shinobi and Konoha Shinobi brats was making his apprentice sentimental. It better not give him anxiety or insecurities or whatever wishy-washiness they let themselves be swayed by. As if on cue, Shisui ghosted up out of the fog. "Hey, Z," he said cheerfully. "Good day." Zabuza glared. "Fuck off," he snarled. "Whoa there," Shisui said dryly. Little extreme, don't you think? Do you know how long it took them to catch 6 rabbits? Zabuza demanded. 6 hours. They're new at rabbit catching, Shisui pointed out. They can barely aim. Shisui muffled a snicker. They'll get better. Zabuza scowled. They better, he growled. Where's the yes man? The playful expression on Shisui's face slammed shut, and his visible eye went hard. Don't call him that, he said coldly. Zabuza eyed the set of his jaw warily, the harsh angles of his face. This was not something to test the younger shinobi on. Fine, he relented, not combative enough and frankly too tired to pick a fight. Where's the brother bear? Itaki is with San, Shisui relented, after one last warning glare. She's showing him the perimeter of her territory as she patrols it. Zabuza raised an eyebrow. Who's watching the children, then? Shisui shrugged. They're watching themselves. They're capable of it, and we're more worried about someone finding us than any of the kids running away. It's not like anyone followed us, Zabuza grumbled. I put down like 6 false trails and no one went after any of them. You know the captain's always cautious. Shisui walked a kunao through his fingers absently. One day we won't get lucky. That's what Attack is teaching his kids first, actually. Ah, Zabuza smirked. Paranoia. That would be a fun lesson to teach his brats. He came awake to the sound of hushed voices. For a moment, he was disoriented, but their chakra signatures were dim and passive, and he sensed no threat from any of them. You know better than to wake a sleeping shinobi, said one. Yeah. A female voice. But everyone else left already. And it's so late, a third said shrilly. What if he makes us catch rabbits again? Oh my gods, interrupted the female voice. Are his teeth pointy? Well, he was from Kiri. The first voice. That's so cool. Enthused the third, and was immediately shushed by the first two. Oh. His fucking brats. He groaned and threw his arm over his face. All 3 stopped talking abruptly. Sensei, said the girl hesitantly. What the fuck do you want? Zabuza tried to say. It came out as, BLRRRRRGH. Said the girl. It's almost noon. The Uchiha. You're supposed to be training us right now, old man, said the Jinhuriki. Naruto, the sound of a fist hitting flesh, followed by a yelp. Zabuza grabbed for his control over his killing intent as it slipped, so he could pretend like he hadn't pulled a double watch shift after losing Chohan to Shisui one too many times. Call me that again and I'll drown you in a bucket, he growled. Give me 30 laps around the training hollow. 30, the girl squeaked. Fine, 50, Zabuza snapped. Hop to it. If you're not done in an hour you can forget about anything other than endurance training for the next week. An hour, the Jinhuriki squawked, but it was to the sound of little hellion feet fading from hearing before Zabuza could cut it down to half an hour. The hollow wasn't that big, only about half a kilometer in length and half that in width. Which meant that one lap would be roughly 2 1/3 kilometers, and 50 laps would be, almost 120 kilometers. Huh. That had sounded a lot more reasonable in his head. That's what the brats got for making him do math in his head before he'd fully woken up. He frowned briefly, tugging the bandages up over his nose and mouth, then shrugged. Endurance training it was. Light footsteps, followed by the lighter click of claws on stone. Zabuza hauled himself upright just before the wolf girl padded in, trailed by one of her wolves. Oh, it's you, he muttered. San, the wolf girl agreed, passing in front of him unconcernedly. There are 3 of your pups generating noise outside. It is very loud. The wolf snorted in agreement, pinning its ears briefly against its skull. It settled in a loose curl, resting its great head on crossed paws and regarding Zabuza with golden eyes. Zabuza eyed it warily. That is Chia, said the wolf girl. The wolf blinked slowly. Oh, said Zabuza. He scruffed a hand through his hair, absently reaching around for his hitayate. Inyazuka, right, he grunted. What brought you to Tetsu? I was born here, said the wolf girl. My father was a Chiryunin who fled into Kusa to escape pursuers when severely wounded. My mother was a kunoichi from Iwa's Inuhara clan whose superiors learned of a stray Inyazuka and sent her to seduce him, but they fell in love and ran away to Tetsu together. Zabuza snorted involuntarily, then covered it with a cough. Love was a child's tale. The wolf girl watched him wryly. Yes, it was too good to be true, she said. Perhaps they loved each other once, but once I was born, her superiors told her to kill him. So she did. But he was a plant. Oh, said Zabuza lamely. Big story small, said the wolf girl, neither survived when each attempted to kill the other. It was probably the wrong thing to fixate on, but... Big story, small. The wolf girl grimaced. Big story, that is not what you say. Long story short, Zabuza offered. Yes, that, said the wolf girl. And so I was raised by the wolf goddess in this, her forest. Wolf goddess, sure. Right, said Zabuza. The feral was remarkably put together for someone literally raised by wolves. But you still choose Konoha. No, she said. I chose Heitake Kakashi. Zabuza raised an eyebrow. A little young for him, aren't you? Not as a mate, she said derisively. He saved my life. And I have 18 years. 18. She looked to be 16 at most, close to Ataka's age rather than older than Shisui. He probed at the girl's chakra signature. It was tightly restrained, but Zabuza could sense it was larger than appeared. Interesting, she had shinobi training. Who trained you? A flash of elongated canine. My wolf mother. She knows the ways of the ninja shinobi, even if she does not practice them. Said Zabuza skeptically. What a strange child. The wolf's ear flickered briefly towards the mouth of the cave, and the wolf girl mirrored the movement with her entire head. Your pups are tiring, she noted. Speaking of strange children. Zabuza grunted. That was fast, he muttered, and hauled himself upright. Later, I guess. He clumped outside to round up his pack of brats. It was true. They did look tired. The Uchiha's pale face was splotchy with red, the Jinchuriki had lost his shirt somewhere along the way, and he could hear the girls wheezing 5 meters away. Stop, he ordered. You fail. That's not fair, the Jinchuriki complained immediately, and predictably. The girl stumbled to a halt halfway across the clearing, trudging towards him on wobbly legs. Tough luck, said Zabuza gleefully. Shisui could run twice that in half the time and come out the other side battle ready. The Uchiha brat glared balefully, but Zabuza wasn't concerned. The little hellion didn't come anywhere near the intimidating he probably hoped he was, not when he looked like a bullfrog in mating season. Water break, he announced, clapping his hands together. 15 minutes. When you get back, you better be ready to work hard. The Jinchuriki let out a growl of mingled dismay and rage, but the girl tottered into him and sent them both to the ground in a dusty, sweat-soaked heap. The morning was still young. Zabuza smiled maliciously beneath the bandages. Endurance training was fun because he didn't have to actually do anything, he could just tell the brats what to do. Vertical sprints. Vertical sprints would do nicely. Chapter 6, yes, Gaara talks to himself. No, he's not crazy, he doesn't think. Mission Report, D21. Continued residence in Redacted. All targets baseline status. All allied combatants and non-combatants baseline status. Operative Cat 15 beginning to experience sustained physical fatigue. Provisions remain basic, rice, tofu, produce acquired from local market. Other forms of sustenance recovered from environment. Security status, low-level risk due to civilian traffic in environment. No contact with enemy combatants. End report. Operative Cat 15. This one is dangerous. Kill him. I don't think that's a good idea, Gaara mused thoughtfully. The black-haired shinobi standing before the three regarded each of them placidly. He's one of the ones Nachan says is protecting us. That bitch. Filling your head with lies and empty promises. We don't need protecting. We protect ourselves. A curl of pride and possessiveness. Gaara hummed agreement. Don't call her that, he reminded absently. I like her. She loves me. Pah! Scorn! I'm the only one who loves you. Gaara shrugged ambiguously. As you know, said Uchiha Itachi, as Gaara returned his attention to the outside world, I was a former Umbu captain of Konohagakure. I will be instructing you in stealth and infiltration, as well as combat. We don't need stealth. A derisive sneer. Yes, we do, disagreed Gaara. Remember all those teams that chased us from Suna? A disgruntled huff. As shinobi, the art of going unnoticed is quite essential for everything from general travel to pitched battle, Uchiha Itachi continued. However, for the three of you, it is exceptionally vital. For example, if you would each name what you believe your greatest strength to be. Sai blinked, and Hinata managed to shuffle her feet without actually moving. Gaara glanced from the others back to Uchiha Itachi. He met his gaze and inclined his head towards Gaara. Why don't you begin? Telling us what to do? You should give me his blood. Crunch his bones into splinters. A flicker of bloodlust, which Gaara waved away. No, Gaara said patiently. We're not killing him. Gaara, the shinobi Uchiha Itachi prompted, when Gaara didn't respond. I am strong, he said aloud, because of my sand. He let the grains swirl gently at his feet. And me. Gaara ignored that. Thank you, Gaara, said Uchiha Itachi, and turned his gaze on Hinata. The girl jumped a little, ducking her head. I, she stuttered. Weak. Dismissive, derisive. Easy prey. She's quiet. I like that, Gaara retorted. She doesn't get in our way. I have, my greatest strength are my eyes, she finally got out, and leaned away from Itachi subtly. If the shinobi noticed, he didn't give any sign of it. He merely nodded acceptance and turned to Sai. I have received some Umbu training, the older boy said, straightening as the shinobi's attention shifted to him, and my greatest strength is the ink jutsu I am able to utilize for combat, scouting, and sending and receiving messages. I bet his blood is the most umami. But even that was as half-hearted as it was wistful after months of Gaara's denials. Thank you, said Uchiha Itachi, and returned his gaze to the three. He clasped his hands neatly behind his back. Each of you has named something valuable, something unique to each of you. While these are great assets, they are also known abilities to those hunting you. They make you a target. Gaara turned the idea over in his head. He didn't like the sound of that. We are not a target. We are the ones doing the hunting. Hinata, I believe it goes without saying that possessing a Byakugan, particularly an unsealed Byakugan, puts you at great risk, said Itachi, and at Gaara's side Hinata shrank back. Sai, there are few who use ink, and those who trained you in Konoha could use it to identify you, continued Itachi. Sai nodded thoughtfully in response, and only the way he pressed his lips together betrayed his displeasure. Gaara. Gaara's attention snapped back to the shinobi. Your use of sand marks you as of Suna heritage to most, and to those in the know, of the Kazekage line. That ingrown cactus. Should have ripped his head off when I had the chance. Gaara growled agreement, clenching and unclenching his hands. I will teach you to be capable shinobi in spite of this. You will be an effective fighter, infiltrator, and leader without what you perceive to be your greatest strength, Uchiha Itachi continued. Hinata, I will teach you to operate without your eyes, Gaara, with no sand. A deafening howl of outrage. No sand. And Sai, without your ink, Uchiha Itachi finished calmly, seemingly oblivious to the way the sand shifted agitatedly at Gaara's feet. Stop that, Gaara snapped harshly, though he himself was discomfited with the idea of fighting without his sand. At his side, Hinata darted nervous glances at him out of the corner of her eyes. Look, you're scaring Hinata. A sneer. Pitiful. But the sand settled at his feet nonetheless. She can't help that she's weak, Gaara pointed out reasonably. She doesn't have you, like I do. A purr of satisfaction and agreement, temporarily mollified. Uchiha Itachi's first lesson was hiding. This meant that Gaara, Hinata, and Sai would attempt to cross a clearing, a stream, and about 50 meters of forested land without being spotted by Itachi, perched in a tree somewhere in the middle. Gaara did not realize how frustrating this would be. He eyed the ground in front of him warily before stepping forward. His foot fell soundlessly, and he edged forward. This is stupid. If you kill them, they won't see you. We've been over this, said Gaara patiently. Nei-chan always says that someone else notices when people turn up dead. Itachi-sensei is right, sneaking around is useful. A derisive snort. Sensei. He's teaching us, isn't he? Gaara pointed out. Stupid things. Quit distracting me, Gaara grumbled, annoyed, bringing his awareness back to his surroundings. Sensei might be moving around. I'm listening for you. That was true. Gaara took another step forward, but the heel of his sandal crunched as he flattered a dead leaf. He froze. Gaara, Itachi-sensei's voice drifted between the trees. Go back and start again. Gaara bared his teeth in a soundless snarl, and his sand whipped through the air in response. The frustration and resentment and glee built up, welling in Gaara like a whirling sandstorm. Cut it out, you're making this harder, Gaara snapped, and the malicious delight dropped away suddenly with an air of sulking. He let the sand drift back down as he turned to cross back over the stream. Hinata darted past, taking cover behind a fallen tree. Gaara watched her interestedly. A faint blush was dusted across her cheeks, but though her eyes were wide, she wasn't trembling. Instead of panicked, she seemed almost excited. Hinata, you're out, called Itachi-sensei. Gaara, don't give away your teammates. Ah. Stupid. Shut up, he growled over the taunting snickers. You're supposed to be helping me. He eyed Hinata, who wore an absent expression as she came up beside him, but she didn't look too put out. This is harder than it sounded, she murmured. HN, said Gaara in agreement, surveying the terrain with narrowed eyes. 10 meters past the stream, Sai crouched in the hollow between protruding roots of a large tree. As he watched, the older boy vaulted neatly over the roots and disappeared to the other side. Do you think he'll make it? Hinata whispered. Gaara frowned. No, probably not. He edged around the side of the clearing cautiously and sank into a low crouch behind an old stump. He peeked around the side, and seeing no sign of Itachi-sensei, sidled forward. Hinata scampered off in the other direction, flitting neatly over the stream and disappearing into the undergrowth. An indignant growl. She left us. I left her first, Gaara pointed out absently. He leaned down onto all fours, creeping lightly across the surface of the stream, and came up with his back against the trunk of a tree. Sai, start over, came Itachi-sensei's voice. Gaara took the opportunity to slink around his tree and past the bush he'd been caught at before. If you burrow underground, he won't catch you. Sensei said don't use sand, reminded Gaara, and I need sand for that. He squinted, peering through the leaves in the direction Itachi-sensei's voice had come from. That's a stupid rule. Resentment, slowly roiling agitation. If I get stronger without our sand, I'll be twice as strong when I do use it, Gaara said logically. He crept sideways, then slunk forward to the base of a large tree. He eyed it with narrowed eyes, then the forest beyond. Silent. He wound up and sprang. He landed lightly in the fork between two large branches, his chakra cushioning his landing. The tree barely twitched. He froze, straining his ears, but heard nothing. Success. You don't need to be stronger. You have me. Gaara couldn't think of a response to that, so he ignored it. He inched upwards, sticking to the trunk with hands and feet like a lizard, then along a long bough that stretched out among the branches of one of the adjoining trees. Sitting back on his haunches, he reached out with one careful hand and placed it on the branch. He leaned forward and it didn't move, so he crept along that as well until he perched in the fork between branch and trunk. He peered below him, hand stuck firmly to the tree, to see Hinata slither through a bush without disturbing the branches. With barely a pause under Gaara's tree, she flowed forward in a controlled roll over the crest of a little ridge to come up against a small boulder jutting up from the ground. A flash of something light drew his attention, and he glanced over in time to see Saito leap gracefully from one tree to the next with a barely audible thump. His eyes flicked towards where Uchiha-sensei had been hiding, but nothing happened. Emboldened, Gaara prowled onto the next branch and reached over. His foot slipped, and he found himself grasping at air as he tipped off the branch. He twisted midair even as he plummeted, turning to land feet first, but a plume of sand blossomed beneath him and cushioned his fall before he hit the ground. Hinata let out a muffled yelp as she was sprayed with the loose grains. Hey! Gaara snapped. I said no sand. Equal parts indignation and smugness. That wasn't me. That was all you. Gaara simmered and banished the sand with a jerk of his hand. Gaara, Hinata, back to the start, called Uchiha-sensei. Gaara, suppress your sand. They went. Again behind the stream, Gaara pounced lightly over its surface to the opposite bank without disturbing the surface of the water, and dove behind a tree. Something's happening. Gaara ignored that in favor of slithering carefully through a small thicket. Listen. More insistent. He could see Sai, still clinging to the side of a tree with enviable ease, almost 20 meters ahead of him. Hinata was still behind him, slipping carefully through the. Listen. His hearing sharpened without warning, and he flinched at the suddenly loud noise. Not even a clone. It took a moment for Gaara to place the voice as one of the other shinobi Shisui, the black-haired one missing an eye. No, came Itaka-sensei's calm voice, muted. This stage of their training I will oversee myself. A soft exhale. My, Itaka, such a responsible sensei you make, said the other shinobi, something strange warmth in his voice. A moment of silence. Did you need something, Shisui? Itaka-sensei asked politely. Said Shisui readily. What do you say we take turns having the teams hunt for dinner for everyone? I'm thinking it'll be good for them. Itaka-sensei contemplated this. I am agreeable. It would be good practice. Zabuza agreed to have his team take care of tonight, said the other. You can do tomorrow if you want. He agreed. Sensei's voice was dry. Very well, we will take care of dinner tomorrow. Is that one of your kids? Awfully brazen, isn't he? The other shinobi said, amused, and Gaara heard a small puff. Sai, begin again. Itaka-sensei's voice boomed in his ear, and Gaara flinched, stepping back, as his hands clapped over his head instinctively. A twig cracked under his heel as his hearing returned to normal. Gaara as well, Sensei added, and Gaara growled. By the time Itaka-sensei called a halt, the sun's rays filtered only weakly through the trees. Each of you has shown significant improvement. We will resume tomorrow morning, said Sensei. Please return to camp, and I will join you there in time. In the end, predictably, Sai had managed to make it the furthest nearly halfway to the target. This does not particularly bother Gaara. How dare that no-name outperform us? We should kill him for this insult. No, said Gaara shortly, too tired to elaborate after 6 hours of attempting to traverse the same 70 meters. His stomach felt hollow. They'd trained the entire day and skipped lunch, which was not new but still unpleasant. Just a little sand, is all it would take. He would twitch, kick a little. His eyes would bug out, all that lovely blood would just flow straight to his face. Shut up. Gaara snapped, forcing the sand down when it started to rise instinctively. Gaara-san, are you alright? Hinata asked timidly, to his side and about half a step behind him. Why Yuri quieter than normal? Fine, Gaara said shortly. That was a long session, Sai noted placidly, but Gaara could see the slightest slump in his normally impeccable posture. He's weakened. Kill him now. Shut up, Gaara repeated, fighting to keep the sand from rising again. I wonder if all RT training sessions will be this long, Hinata murmured. Her exhaustion showed in her stumbling steps, much louder than they had been when she'd flitted lightly through the woods. Tomorrow, we hunt, Gaara said. Heard Itaka-sensei talking to Uchiha Shisui. Ah, said Sai thoughtfully. I see. It would serve as a valuable learning experience while providing resources for the group. Have you hunted before, Gaara-san, Sai-san? Hinata asked. I only know how to trap animals like and Nico-sensei taught us. Yes. Remember that last Umbu, how we tracked him, cowering on the ground like a rabbit? How we crushed his legs when he tried to flee, how he begged and screamed and bled. Purred, like a sated cat. No, said Gaara abruptly. I have not either, Sai answered. I'm sure Ataka-sensei will instruct us. The spot Uchiha-sensei had chosen for their training was quite a distance from the clearing beyond the caves. Gaara had been reliably informed that this was because you don't spill blood near your den, but the long walk annoyed him nonetheless. As they finally reached the caves, Gaara's limbs were shaking as little-used muscles trembled with the effort it had taken to hold tensed positions for so long. At least, since he was going back, he would see Nei-chan again. This cheered him slightly. Bah! You shouldn't put so much thought into her. Gaara ignored this with the ease of long practice. Unfortunately, Nei-chan's team wasn't back yet. Naruto's team was, though, an acceptable substitute. Danger! Dangerous! Hissed, then a pause. Loud. This latter half at least was true. But Naruto was not just loud, he was bright and warm like the sun hanging over the desert he had not seen in nearly 2 years. And maybe like the sun to unaware travelers he was dangerous, but Gaara had not seen any sign of danger from him. In fact, he was generally harmless. A growled disagreement. Gaara, the Jinchuriki cheered gleefully, bounding towards them energetically. Gaara sniffed the air. The scent of blood preceded Naruto, and his shirt was splattered with it. Hi, Hinata. Hi, Sai. Get back here, Naruto. Sakura cried. Her forearms too were stained with red. Behind her, Sasuke stood as well, a half-shucked rabbit dangling from his hand by its ears. Gaara wrinkled his nose and stepped back when the blonde lunged to tackle him. What are you doing? Hinata edged away delicately. Ano, why you have something on your shirt, she said timidly. This is dinner. Naruto explained, turning back reluctantly to the mess next to the fire. We hunted some rabbits and now we're cooking them. A dubious expression flitted across Sai's face. Gaara agreed. The last time Naruto had cooked, half the vegetables had been raw, the other half soggy. Temari Nei-chan still didn't let him prepare meat. I am sure it will be delicious, Hinata said loyally. Gaara frowned. Naruto beamed. We. Sakura demanded. Not if you keep slacking off. Naruto drooped dramatically. I'm coming, he groaned, and slouched his way back to his team. Let's wash up, suggested Sai, turning away from the squabbling trio. It seems we will have some time before dinner. But all that blood will go to waste. Those stupid brats will just throw it out. It's just rabbit blood, Gaara dismissed, and followed Sai to the adjoining ravine. He disliked the stickiness of sweat, and the way his legs still trembled with every step. A dip in the river would at least stop the first. He stripped down to the skin, and tossing his clothes in a careless pile, waded into the stream past Sai folding his own clothes neatly at the bank. The shock of the cold did nothing for Gaara's temper, but he let himself sink neck deep in the water anyways. Too cold. I don't like this. Yes, said Gaara, but clean is better than sticky. Even if it is cold. A snarl of disagreement. A pulse of warm chakra flooded Gaara's body, burning away the numbing cold. Gaara hummed at the sensation, closing his eyes. Warm baths are nice, he murmured. For reluctant, rumbling purr. Just remember that it is I who loves you. As the days grew shorter, Gaara became much better at sneaking. He pulled the hood of his cloak lower over his head. Though heavy, the fur lining kept him warm despite the chill that sank into the trees like the snowfall. That, he did not like. Snow was heavy and wet and cold and made sneaking hard even though the sound was muffled. Too wet. This was grumbled. Too cold. In his head, it was quieter too. Gaara, Sai hissed. Up that tree. Hinata, left and press him at the signal. Gaara darted up the tree, landing lightly in the white frosted boughs. His cloak settled lightly around him without disturbing a single flake of snow. Narrowing his eyes, he spotted a flash of black hair 7 meters ahead of him. Wait, he muttered. Sai, continue circling. He will escape to the north unless you keep going. A hint of light cloth was all he could see as Sai moved, flitting lightly over the snow. No movement from the target. Now, Gaara snarled, and dove out of his tree, 3 kunao in each hand. His cloak billowed out behind him as he leapt. The target turned, weaving neatly out of the first volley of kunao. Hinata burst out of the bushes 3 meters away from him, lunging with open-handed strikes that the target deflected easily. A hard strike knocked her backwards several steps. Gaara leapt forward as she faltered, launching another kunai from beneath his cloak. At the same time, Sai darted out from behind the target, bringing his tanto forward. Gaara yanked on the wire, bringing the kunai back to wrap the target's arms to his torso as Sai delivered a debilitating slash at the target's calf. Hinata lunged back in, landing a hard strike to the center of the target's chest. The target vanished in a swirl of crows. The wire attached to Gaara's kunai went slack, and he snarled wordlessly. But despite his frustrated rage, he did not let his sand so much as stir. "Good work," said Itachi-sensei serenely, dropping neatly out of a nearby tree. "The plan was sound, your teamwork commendable." He paused, meeting each of their gazes. Gaara simmering, Hinata defeated, Sai blank-faced as always. "However, you were overly fixated on what you perceived to be the target and failed to notice a basic trap." Sai's eyes narrowed as he sheathed his tanto. "That is not a trap. We will fall for T twice," Hinata murmured. Gaara grunted in agreement, flexing his fingers absently. "This drill is over," said Sensei implacably. "I believe it is our team's turn to prepare dinner." Gaara sighed through his nose. He didn't want to hunt animals, that was no challenge. He wanted to hunt people. "Perhaps we should try a moose," Sai suggested. "It would be enough for several meals, and we could have uninterrupted training for a week." Gaara liked this plan. No hunting for a week. And a moose? That would prove a greater challenge than the little rabbits that flitted across the top of the snow. "You are welcome to try," said Itachi-sensei contemplatively. "Chia scented some along the northwestern border, and freezing meat for storage is no issue." Gaara exchanged glances with Sai and Hinata. "Anno," said Hinata hesitantly. "This is not a training mission," she trailed off. "Very well," Itachi-sensei said almost indulgently. "All ability restrictions are off. You may use whatever tools and techniques you wish." "Yes." The sand stirred of its own volition, twisting up out of his pack to wrap around Gaara like a second skin. "Finally." "It's been a week since I trained with our sand," Gaara reminded, but couldn't deny the hint of warmth that curled up inside. "A week too long." "Let's get started," said Sai, anticipation coloring his voice as he pulled a scroll and brush out from under his cloak. Under his deft strokes, a pack of inky black wolves bloomed on the paper and pounced out in front of him. Hinata's eyes opened with the Byakugan, and she lifted her head. "And nothing in my range yet," she murmured, as Sai's beasts leapt past. "We'll see you back at camp, Sensei," called Sai absently, darting after the ink wolves. "You will," Itachi-sensei's voice drifted through the trees, as Gaara chased after his teammate with Hinata on his heels. The wolves split off, and Gaara followed as Sai hurdled a fallen tree. He landed lightly on top of the snow, leaving only the shallowest footprints in the light powder. "Moose scent. North." "North," Gaara said, and Sai angled down the side of the mountain. "ISC tracks I in the V Valley," said Hinata. "Take point," Sai directed, and slowed to let her overtake him. Hinata flitted past, zigzagging her way down into the valley. Gaara stopped as Hinata crouched by the blurred tracks, scrutinizing the snowfields with narrowed eyes. He tilted his nose up to scent the air again. These are too small." "Elk prints," Hinata murmured, hovering a finger over the trail. "A large H herd, passed through only recently. Elk everywhere. Old tracks." "What about the moose?" prodded Gaara. A disgruntled grumble. "We're not looking for elk today," dismissed Sai. "Are there moose prints?" "And not here," Hinata said absently, and lifted her head as her gaze focused on something far off. There," she said. "Larger hoof prints." A pair of Sai's ink wolves loped across the field, crisscrossing the river valley. Gaara watched them go absently. "Not true prey. No blood. We do not kill wolves," reminded Gaara, "not even fake wolves. Wolves are friends." "Pa." Gaara ignored the rising distaste with the ease of long practice. "We don't have friends." "When was the last snowfall?" asked Hinata, breath coming in visible puffs. 2 days ago, answered Sai. The tracks may not be fresh. Some wind, Gaara pointed out. It would have covered up the tracks if they were not fresh. True, said Sai, and crouched along the tracks. He reached out with one hand then a second, splaying out his fingers, and barely matched the size off the hoof print. We will be the first team to attempt to take down prey of this size, he noted absently. We will have to be careful if we are to succeed. Hinata agreed. San-sensei said even wolves are cautious when hunting prey as large as a moose. She frowned suddenly. These T-tracks are leading towards the western border of San-sensei's territory. We should hurry if we want to catch them. Understood, said Sai, and straightened. From all directions, shadowy streaks converged on their position as he recalled his ink beasts. Follow my lead, he directed, and took off after the trail. Running Gaara did not particularly enjoy, but after long hours of training with Itaka-sensei, he grudgingly admitted that his speed and endurance had increased significantly. As he loped after Sai, the cold air bit unpleasantly into his lungs, but the pace he knew he could keep for hours. The wolves split off as they crossed into the next valley. Keep us on track, Hinata, Sai directed, and veered along the side of the valley instead of dropping down into its trough. I see it, Hinata murmured. 01, moving at a steady pace. It's almost at the western border. We need to cut it off. Sai increased the pace until Hinata and Gaara were sprinting after the older boy, and down in the valley, 2 pairs of inky wolves streaked across the valley floor. Gaara chanced to glance down as the bulky animal gradually came into view. The ink beasts were gaining on the moose, galvanizing the larger animal into a rough gallop. The rocky shelf cut off abruptly, and Sai leapt from the lip. Gaara, he called sharply. Gaara threw out his hands, and the sand shot out from his pack and caught Sai in a billowing cushion, then himself and Hinata as they followed him over the edge. Weary not going to make it, Hinata panted, eyes locked far away even as she crouched on the sand platform hurtling down the side of the mountain. Gaara narrowed his eyes, straining to control their fall. He jerked the sand to the side, narrowly avoiding a rocky outcrop, and Sai nearly overbalanced over the edge of the makeshift platform. Gaara frowned, yanking the sand higher. The others were just so breakable, and it was hard to account for their squirming. Just let them fall. Go back to being quiet, Gaara grunted, and received only a grumble in response. Sai sprang off the platform as they neared the foot of the slope, and Gaara let the sand crash into the ground. Hinata yelped as the sand crumbled beneath her, tripping off onto the uneven ground. Gaara blinked at her bemusedly, landing lightly beside her. She could see everything, why hadn't she seen that? Go, Hinata wheezed at him, waving a hand weakly. With a mental shrug, Gaara took off after Sai's rapidly retreating back, summoning his sand back into his pack. The thunder of heavy hooves rattled the earth beneath his feet as he ran, but even as he sprinted he could see they would not be fast enough. One of the ink wolves stretched out and snapped at the leg of the moose, but a violent buck of its hind hooves splattered the beast into a spray of droplets. In just a few seconds, the moose would cross out of Sand's territory. Sai launched himself into a desperate pounce, Tonto out, and the blade missed the rearmost leg of the moose by centimeters. He landed in a crouch, sinking in the snow, as his 3 remaining wolves pulled up short, circling back to him as the moose thundered on. A frown of frustration darkened his eyes as he watched it go. Gaara bared his teeth. He wasn't going to let this prey escape. He sprinted straight past, throwing out his sand in a wide, flat band. Gaara, called Sai sharply, but Gaara didn't listen, not when he had this. The moose lowed in alarm as it turned at the last minute, crashing shoulder first into the wall of sand. Forced back around, the moose lowered its head and trained its rack of antlers on Gaara, who skittered back a couple steps in spite of himself. The moose charged. Gaara threw up his hands in front of him, and the sand shot up in front of him as he crossed his arms. The sand sprayed as the animal slammed into the other side, but the shield held. "Help me," he gritted out. Disinterest, shaded by amusement. "You're fine. The ink boy is coming." The moose bellowed as Sai swept in from the side, rearing around antlers first and forcing the older boy to leap backwards, then turn tail and run as it charged after him. Hinata was there in an instant, flinging a pair of kunao at the moose's other side, but the animal didn't change its course until Sai's 3 remaining ink wolves harried it from behind, nipping at its hind legs. It turned faster than Gaara expected, whirling on gangly legs, and slammed a flailing hoof into one of the wolves. It splattered in a shower of ink, and the remaining 2 dodged out of the way as Sai darted back in. Enough. Cease allowing this prey beast to make a fool of you. Give me more sand, then. Gaara snarled. A derisive snort. If you can't reach the sand beneath the snow by yourself, then you don't deserve to use it. Gaara bared his teeth but reached, straining to reach, but only a pitiful handful of sand rose to his call, shooting up from the ground to join the swarm circling in front of him. Hinata leapt in and out, landing a single open-handed strike before retreating out of reach of the moose's range, just as it lashed out with both front hooves at Sai, who rolled out of the way. Gaara gritted his teeth and yanked, and a shower of sand burst from the snow. Immediately, he hurled a sand claw at the moose's leg and clenched his fist. A resounding crack split the air, and the moose bellowed in pain and rage as its leg shattered in a spray of blood. A purr of satisfaction. Sai was there in an instant, driving the entirety of his blade into the base of its neck even as its antlers decimated another ink wolf with a blundering lurch. It wrenched away, ripping the Tonto from Sai's grasp, and trampled the last ink wolf. Sai whirled out of the way, but the tip of an antler raked across his torso and caught briefly on the edge of his cloak before ripping away. The moose staggered and crashed to the ground, eyes rolling wildly as its legs flailed uselessly. Blood leaked steadily from its ruined leg, and the satisfaction rumbled through Gaara viscerally as his sand soaked it up. Hinata hopped neatly over the jerking antlers and delivered an almost delicate 2-fingered tap to the moose's chest. At once, its legs jerked, then slackened, and its head collapsed bonelessly to the ground. The blood roaring in Gaara's ears subsided, and they looked at each other over the still warm body in silence. Hinata's hands were trembling as she released her Kekkei Genkai. Sai's were clamped over the graze above his stomach. All 3 were splattered in blood, though admittedly Gaara seemed to be the only one that did not seem to mind. For a moment, they simply stared, chests heaving, at the animal they had felled. We succeeded, said Sai finally, leaning over to retrieve his Tonto. The impression of an eye roll. No shit. That's a bad word, Gaara reminded. Don't. Succeeded? Perhaps, said Itaka-sensei icily. Gaara repressed a full-body flinch, and Hinata's eyes grew comically wide. Sai let go of the Tonto's hilt and took a wary step backwards. Oh. Shit. With a sinking feeling, Gaara didn't respond. When he turned, Itaka-sensei was regarding the team evenly, with displeasure wrapped around him like a cloak. Itaka-sensei, Sai greeted calmly, but his eyes flickered to the side, betraying his apprehension. I am quite certain that each of you understood that you were to remain within the borders of Sans territory at all times, Itaka-sensei said implacably. Yet at least one of you ventured beyond. Gaara resisted the urge to seethe when Sai's eyes tracked first the disturbed snow and flurry of footprints clearly continuing beyond the border, then flitted briefly to Gaara before returning to Itaka-sensei. He was fairly certain that Itaka-sensei already knew not only how many, but who had done it. I apologize, sensei, said Sai smoothly. We merely became caught up in the... No, said Itaka-sensei, and Sai cut himself off abruptly. I will not accept these excuses from you. From any of you, he warned, turning his icy glare on Hinata, who quailed, and Gaara, who bristled. It was for prey. Sulkily, with an undercurrent of resentment. Gaara, said Itaka-sensei. What is the reason you were told not to leave Sans Forest? Making demands of us. This was sneered. We should smear him into a paste. There are many enemies hunting us and staying in the forest keeps us safe, Gaara said grudgingly. Specifically. Itaka-sensei prodded. The roiling resentment took on an increasingly darker edge. Gaara forced it down and bit back the urge to snarl. Suna wants me and my sister, Konoha wants everyone else, Kyumo and Iwa would want all of us, and the samurai from northern Tetsu would want to kill us for being shinobi, he recited dully. A combination of seals and interference from the natural chakra produced in Sans Forest hides us as long as we stay in her territory. Yet, Itaka-sensei said deliberately, you did not. Gaara narrowed his eyes and said nothing. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The longer it dragged on, the more disappointment Gaara could read in his stare. "Consider all ability restrictions back in effect," said Itachi-sensei finally. "All of you are confined to camp for the next week." Naruto would explode in protests. Neji would argue with a heat veiled by logic. But Gaara's team just stared at their feet. "I will ask San to retrieve the animal. The three of you, return to camp at once," Itachi-sensei ordered. "Do not leave unless you are given permission to do so. Sai, have that wound looked at." "Hi," murmured Sai, and was quickly echoed by Hinata. Gaara jerked his head in a resentful nod when Itachi-sensei glanced at him. "Go," said Itachi-sensei, and the three of them began their humiliating trek back to camp. Gaara did not like Hyuga Neji much, but this was because Neji saw everything, unlike Hinata, who was supposed to see everything but couldn't. This meant that Neji could see Gaara's San sneaking up behind him during spars, or the special chakra Gaara used when he got angry. Today, that meant he saw the way Hinata practically slunk into camp, the slump in Sai's normally impeccable posture, and how Gaara seethed as he stormed in. "What is going on?" the older boy demanded, eyes flicking between the blood-splattered team and the tunnel entrance. "Hinata-sama, are you injured? Were you attacked?" No," Hinata whispered. "No, I am fine. There's no danger." Neji narrowed his eyes. "What happened?" he snapped, turning on Sai. Sai lifted his hand to peer at the wound beneath. "Our team attempted to take down a more challenging prey and crossed out of San's territory," he said shortly. "You left the territory?" Neji's lip curled derisively. "You were injured by a prey animal?" "Yes," Sai bit out coldly, leveling Neji with a blank stare. "Gaara." Nei-chan's surprised call cut over Neji's disdainful snort as she rushed towards them, and her focus zeroed in on Sai's bloodied hands. "Sai, have Shisui-sensei take a look at that," she ordered. "He's above the gorge." "I am forbidden from leaving camp," Sai interrupted monotonously. Nei-chan pursed her lips briefly in a frown. "Neji, get sensei," she directed, and Neji turned away with a huff. Gaara watched him go a little bitterly. Just the knowledge that the older boy could leave when he could not stung, and he'd only been back in camp for a minute. He turned away. "Gaara." Nei-chan called after him, but Gaara wasn't in the mood to talk to even her and stalked to the sleeping quarters. Gaara did not sleep, but he had a bunk in the cave anyways. He swung up the first stack to the topmost hammock and slouched against the wall, slinging his cloak around him as he glowered into the dim. The cave was empty except for him, but half-filled knapsacks, weapons, and cooking supplies littered the floor in small clumps. He wasn't in the mood to do anything except stew. He wrestled his pack off, and for a moment considered just hurling it and the sand within at the opposite wall. "Don't." A sleepy grumble and warning in one. Gaara scowled and settled for shoving it to the bunk frame until it dangled off the edge. "Quit sulking and just kill him already. We don't need to listen to that insect." "He's the sensei," Gaara grunted. "I can't not listen to him." A sneer. "So you'll just let him push you around?" "Weak." Gaara bristled. "I'm not weak, Gaara," said Nei-chan. "That bitch." Gaara's head reeled under the onslaught of unbridled rage. "Daring to interrupt us." "Shut up." Gaara snarled, and forced the fury back down. "Gotten bandaged, and your team still needs to cook," he heard her say as his senses returned to normal. He peered down at her. The right tilt to her mouth deepened as she regarded him, hands resting lightly on her hips. "I heard what happened. I know you're not afraid of what's out there," she said, "but Itachi-sensei's right. If any of us use our chakra outside San's territory, we're sending up a beacon to our enemies." Gaara glowered at her. She sighed and reached out a hand to him. "Come here," she said. Gaara considered. "Don't do it." He huffed and slithered down the bunk frame laboriously to the rumble of an annoyed growl. Tamarine carted a hand through his hair, and he half closed his eyes at the sensation, letting the motion soothe the resentment that had built up over the course of the day. "The rules are stupid," he muttered. "They keep us safe," Nei-chan corrected, but the gentle scratch of her fingers kept him from getting too annoyed. "Come on, Otauto. I brought you out of Suna for a reason, and I won't let them take you back now. A snort. As if she could let anyone do anything. Quiet, Gaara admonished absently, leaning into her hand. Good job killing that moose, by the way, she added, fingers stilling in his hair. San and Yuuki just brought it in. Gaara hummed, displeased that stupid moose was the reason he couldn't leave this place. But then Tamarine brushed through his hair again and his annoyance melted away. Go on, help your team, said Tamari, ruffling his hair one last time, before leaning over to snag one of the kunai holsters scattered on the ground. Gaara frowned. He didn't particularly want to help his team. A derisive scoff. So don't. But if he didn't, Tamarine would give him the set eyes and frown and wouldn't pet his hair. The impression of rolled eyes. For Kami's sake. You're a simple child, aren't you? No, Gaara was a special child. That's what Nei-chan said. When Gaara ducked out of the cave and through the tunnel to the small training gorge, Sai was crouching next to the moose with a kunai, prodding the wound in its chest cautiously. San sat cross-legged on his other side, gesturing at the animal and leaning comfortably against her sprawled-out wolf, mindless of the snow carpeting the frozen ground. Gaara scented the air. Yuuki. Hinata leaned over her shoulder, listening carefully to whatever she was explaining. Her eyes flicked upwards as Gaara approached. Ah, Gaara. Come to learn to fish? Gaara blinked, nonplussed. She is referencing an old adage, Sai offered helpfully. That if one teaches a man to fish, one feeds the man for a lifetime. Yes, San agreed. I will teach you to fish this moose now. It is like butchering elk, but bigger. Gaara eyed the trail the carcass had left in the snow when it had been dragged into camp. The animal was easily double the size of an elk, nearly 1.5 times the height of Chie or Yuuki and twice their bulk. This will take many hours, San explained placidly. First, you will remove the organs. Then, you will peel off the skin. All of it, at once, in one piece. She watched them expectantly. Sai turned back to the animal resolutely, and Gaara crouched next to him, slipping a kunai out of his holster. A sniff. So unnecessary. Just eat it like it was meant to be eaten, fresh. Gaara wrinkled his nose. Start at the stomach, Gaara, said Sai. Hinata, start at the neck. I'll take the head off. The top of the neck is most vulnerable, San added. It will come off easily if you cut there. She proffered a curved knife, entirely white, and when Sai took it, Gaara saw it was one made entirely of bone. Sai passed off his kunai to Hinata, who shuffled up next to Gaara. Gaara eyed the corpse carefully, then jabbed the kunai through hair and hide. As he worked, he heard familiar footsteps padding softly over packed snow. Tamari, Niji, San greeted. Good. You will learn to fish moose as well. A confused pause. Gaara hid a twinge of amusement as he hacked his way across the animal's stomach. Of course, Nei-chan said belatedly. Her sandals shuffled as she settled into a more comfortable position. This was not the first time Gaara's team had butchered an animal. Sai moved around him, cracking open the pelvis and breastbone. Hinata pried windpipes and other tubes from the throat. Absently, Gaara reached for the wire Hinata handed him to tie off the entrails before hauling them out in one giant, sloppy mess. They slid out easily for the most part, and when they did not, Gaara reached in with one arm, then his entire torso, to hack out the stubborn bits. Even in the rapidly cooling air, the insides were still warm, and the intestines sank a little as the snow around them melted. He swiped at the blood splattered on his face and only succeeded in smearing it. Leave it. I like it. Even with 3 of them working, an hour passed before they fully separated the pelt from the rest of the carcass. Hey. Anyone could hear Naruto coming before they saw him. Sometimes Gaara wondered how he'd managed to sneak out of Hinokuni without giving his entire group away. Wow. Did you guys kill this thing? That's awesome. We will show respect for the animals that give their lives so that we can eat, San intoned pointedly, as Tamari hefted the rolled pelt and Niji dragged the head towards the snow hollow they kept their food in by its antlers. We do not call their sacrifice awesome. Predictably, Naruto was unperturbed. Oh, man, it's so big. We could eat it for, like, a year. Only if you want to starve, idiot, Sasuke cut in. The fur lining of his hood was dusted in snow, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold or perhaps exertion. A month, if that's all we ate. Ugh, muttered Sakura. Remember when we ate only rabbit for weeks because that was the only thing we knew how to catch? Gaara made a face. You may freeze some and salt smoke dry the rest, said San. There is no need to eat all at once. So, when's dinner? Naruto demanded, having clearly lost interest in San's explanation halfway through. Gaara sawed his way through a lower leg joint and tossed the severed limb behind him. Sai, Gaara, and Hinata are currently occupied. San paused and eyed the newly arrived team thoughtfully. Sai will give you some meat, and you will prepare dinner in their stead, she decided. Hey! Naruto sputtered indignantly. We had dinner duty yesterday, Sakura pointed out. We rotate. Do you wish to eat tonight? San leaned back into her wolf unconcernedly. I will not allow this team to stop until they have finished fishing this moose, and that may not happen until the moon is high. Sakura, Naruto, and Sasuke exchanged glances. Fishing, the moose, said Sakura hesitantly. Hinata dropped another lower leg bone onto the ground. It's a saying, about learning new skills, she explained. Fishing the moose, Naruto repeated, face screwed up in concentration. Just give us the meat, muttered Sasuke. We'll make dinner, whatever. Hey, bastard, don't you think that we should decide that as a team? Naruto demanded. Do you want to eat? His teammate fired back. Sakura agrees with me. Sakura shrugged when Naruto whipped around to glare at her accusingly. I want dinner. Sai slit the connective tissue off a bundle of muscle and tossed it at Naruto, who fumbled but caught it instinctively. Taking apart an entire moose was hard work, made more difficult by their tools Kunao and San's bone knife. Just use your teeth. You have them for a reason, don't you? Teeth were for eating. Gaara wasn't eating raw moose. A snort. Who says you can't? It's a delicacy. You have a little pointed tooth for tearing meat, you should use it. Gaara considered the band of muscle he was working to pull free from the left flank. Carefully, he leaned down and sank his teeth into the top of the muscle, braced against the bulk of the carcass, and jerked his head to the side, ripping it free. He unlocked his jaw and let the meat flop free. He glanced up to see Hinata watching with wide eyes and Sai with an almost frown. I scared her again, Gaara complained. An amused satisfaction. Well, you do have blood smeared all over your face. Gaara licked his lips absently, chasing the metallic taste with his tongue. That is not healthy for ninjan, said San severely. Like elk, moose meat also has tiny animals that make you sick if you eat without freezing or cooking first. You are not just ninjan, Gaara was reassured. I will burn out the bacteria and viruses. Reluctantly, Gaara reverted to his kunao. He liked Hinata, but there was a difference between quiet and lets him do what he wants and silent and terrified and useless in the field. Dinner. Sakura's shrill yell cut through his concentration. Gaara blinked up at the sky, now shot through with gold and gray. San caught his look but made no move to get up. You think you can eat when you are not even halfway through? No, you will eat when you are finished. That bitch. Gaara flinched from the sudden onslaught of rage, but glowered at San nonetheless. She regarded him with the same flat stare. You will not disobey me on this. You are on narrow ice already. Or did you think your sensei did not tell me what your team did? A snarl. She does not command us. I demand her blood for her insolence. Gaara growled agreement, but caught a glimpse of Hinata's pale face out of the corner of his eye. No, he grumbled. We don't need to eat yet. We'll save some for you, said Nei-chan, leaning down to ruffle his hair before heading back for the main camp with Niji. As the darkness encroached, Sai ringed the carcass with torches under San's watchful eye. But as the darkness grew stronger, so did the cold. Gaara flipped the hood of his cloak up, leaving slimy fingerprints in the fur lining. The meat froze beneath his fingers as he worked to pry it away muscle by muscle. Senses clogged by blood scent, he didn't notice Shisui-sensei's arrival. Shisui, San greeted, and Gaara glanced up to see the teen settle next to her, his back not quite touching Yuuki. He waved his fingers at Gaara in a salute. I see our little rule breakers are hard at work, he said to San, and Gaara scowled, stabbing viciously through tissue and tendon. I suppose it will free up Ataka to train his brother's team while Zabuza's still out. I do not understand why you do not just starve them for a week or two, returned San placidly. That is how I was raised. Well, we're trying to minimize the child endangerment here, said Shisui-sensei. And I don't think it's as severe a punishment for wolves since humans eat 2 to 3 times a day while wolves eat like once a week. Said San thoughtfully. Yuuki chuffed a laugh. So instead, you deprive them of fighting. Well, said Shisui-sensei. Yes. It's a stupid punishment. A resentful growl. It was effective, though. A month off of hunting duties was not worth a week of confinement. Gaara would go for a rabbit next time and let the moose get away. He glared down at the meat in his hand and ripped it bodily away from the bone. At least with a rabbit he wouldn't be stripping it down 6 hours after the kill. He would be sitting in his nice, warm bunk, watching the others sleep. Beside him, Hinata hopped over the ribcage with an armload of meat. The moose was mostly skeletal, now, clean white shining through the scraps of meat clinging stubbornly to bone. Enough, San announced. You may move the bones to the cold storage for the wolves. We are finished here. She stretched languidly and rose to make her way back towards the main hollow. Good work with this, said Shisui-sensei. Next time just stay in her territory, I think Tamari's saved some meat for you, once you've washed up. Another reason why Nachan was his favorite. Day 1 of confinement was incredibly boring. Naruto's team took off with his sensei at dawn, leaving Gaara to glare impotently after them until Tamari, on her way out with Niji and Shisui-sensei, ruffled his hair. Gaara paced like a caged coyote, snarling impotently at the walls of the canyon. Hinata, unperturbed, flowed through her katas around the ashy remains of the cooking fire and Sai, who sat with a cleaning cloth and his tanto. Come, said Sai, at almost mid-morning. We may as well spar in the training hollow. Hinata. She agreed. It would be nice to do something productive. Gaara whipped around, cloak billowing around him, and prowled through the narrow pass ahead of his team. He could use a good fight, even if he couldn't kill them. Could 2 kill them? Taijutsu only, said Sai after a pause. Testing Ataka-sensei's rules at this time is unwise. Ugh. Gaara wrinkled his nose. Fine, whatever. As long as he got to hit something. He dropped his satchel of sand at the roots of a tree and whirled. Let's go, he growled impatiently. Begin, said Sai, and turned neatly on his heel as Gaara lunged past. Snow went flying in all directions as he landed in a crouch. Hinata darted into the fray, cloak whipping behind her. Gaara may unquestionably be a predator, and Sai both fast and strong, but in terms of taijutsu, even without her Kekii Genkai, Hinata outclassed them both easily. She caught Sai as he dodged, brushing aside his punch and landing an open palm strike on his chest. She pursued as he gave ground, only hopping backwards when he spun around in a kick. Gaara charged before Sai could recover, swinging for his head, but Sai brought his arm up, barely in time to block, and ducked his follow-up. Before Gaara could continue his offensive, his senses blared a warning, and he whipped around in time for Hinata's hand to glance off his arm in a spray of sand. No sand, Sai warned, even as he darted past after Hinata's retreat. 30-second timeout. Gaara bared his teeth. Stay down, he growled impotently at his sand, pacing just out of range as Hinata and Sai exchanged blows, sending up sprays of snow. A snort. You can't just turn off an automatic defense, no matter how badly your sensei wants you to. Gaara launched himself back into the battle with a roundhouse kick just as Hinata knocked Sai's legs out from under him, forcing her to twist away. She landed and struck in a single movement, lightning fast, and Gaara tripped backwards, rolling to his feet as Sai surged past. His jab was brushed aside with almost careless ease, and Hinata spun to land a kick on his unprotected side. She ducked as Gaara pounced, and he sailed over her, twisting just enough that her hand just barely brushed his leg instead of landing a solid hit. For a moment, the three eyed each other cautiously, chests heaving with exertion. Sai shook the half-melted snow out of his hair. Gaara charged. Hinata's eyes narrowed as she flipped neatly out of the way, but Sai was on her in a heartbeat. With a spinning kick she blocked midair. Gaara lashed out as she landed, and although she twisted out of the way, it gave Sai the opening he needed to land a hit hard enough to shove her back a couple meters. Gaara pounced after her, but was forced to veer out of the way when Sai launched a kick in his direction. "Hey, pups. Small ninja." Gaara flinched mid-lunge and skidded through the snow. Sai aborted an aerial attack. Hinata whipped around fast enough to send snow slush flying. Leaning atop Chie's head, San eyed the trio with amusement. "You have unfinished work," she informed them. "You will have new clothes, but first you treat the pelt." The team blinked at each other bemusedly. "The moose," San prodded. "The hide. Leather. Very simple. Long process. Come along." "Very well," said Sai. "I suppose that since it will take a while, we should begin with the leather immediately." "Tools first," corrected San. "We will make tools from the bones." "Tools," Sai amended. "Then leather." Gaara scowled. He wanted to keep trying to hit people. Just hit them, then. They're not even paying attention. One moose could have 20 kilograms of antler. 20 kilograms of antler could make a lot of knives. And hide scrapers. But mostly knives, because that's what San liked, and Gaara was okay with that because he liked them too. By the time the hide was soaking in brain, Gaara had the makings of 2 full tangs, and from the commotion in the main hollow, both teams were back. When his team wandered back in, there was a small upheaval of Ninken, and at its center, the captain. Naruto's sensei skulked in the shadows, Haku by his side. There was also Gaara's sensei. Gaara narrowed his eyes, not quite having forgiven him. Just kill him, already. Maybe not that annoyed with him, though, since he taught Gaara how to hit people. Why do I even try with you? Gaara. Naruto beamed. Most of them walked on top of the snow, since doing so with chakra was even easier than wall walking, but Naruto hadn't mastered even that and so slogged through the mess like a civilian. Your sensei is totally awesome. I mean, even though he's Sasuke's brother and Sasuke's like, the worst. Hey, watch it, Sasuke snapped. Itachi-sensei knows so much and he doesn't make us run pointless laps like Zabuza-baka-sensei does. 5 laps, right now, for disrespect, Chikuwa, aforementioned sensei hollered across the hollow. It's Naruto, the blonde screeched even as he took off, leaving Gaara blinked bemusedly behind him. This also left Gaara with Sasuke. The other boy jerked his head at the fire. Food, he offered. We made pigeon stew. And he helped me fix my taijutsu. And he didn't, yelled Naruto as he thundered past. Said Gaara. His stomach was hollow and his fingers half frozen. Stew would fix that. A hand ruffled through his hair. Gaara twisted around in time to see Tamarine's smile. Hey, Otauto, she greeted warmly. How was your day? Gaara glanced at the bowl of soup, the half-finished bone knives in his holster, and Naruto still plowing his way through his laps. Acceptable, he said. She beamed back at him. That's good, she said cheerfully. There was a smear of dirt on her cheek and melting snow in her hair and hood. Gaara leaned into her, and wrapped in his cloak, let his attention drift. Gaara wasn't entirely sure what happened. It was day 4 of camp confinement. Itachi-sensei had declared a 3-on-1 sparring match in the training hollow, but remaining infuriatingly out of reach the entire time, and the roiling rage in the back of Gaara's mind had swelled and, on second thought, that was probably what caused it. But in his defense, Gaara couldn't really think, not when he was on his knees in the snow with both hands clamped around his head to ward off the thrum of agony and bloodlust. Between the rasping of his own breath, he could hear Hinata murmuring something too quietly for him to hear. He bared his teeth. Stand back, he heard Itachi-sensei order. A bolt of white-hot pain stabbed him through the temple, and he flinched. He dares mock us. Kill him. The snarl echoed through his head, and for a moment, all he could hear was the throb of his own heart. He clutched his ears futilely. Stop, he growled, fighting down the wave of sand that swirled up around him. Gaara. Itachi-sensei's normally calm voice sharpened. Gaara opened his mouth to respond, but another jolt of pain whited out his vision and he let out a pained whine. "Gaara," Itachi-sensei repeated insistently. "When Gaara loses control of his bloodlust, only a kill will stop the sand," he heard Sai say urgently, as if from a distance. "Generally, he..." And the rest was drowned out by an enraged roar of, "I said, kill him." Gaara shrieked as the sand overwhelmed him, crawling over his body and enveloping his mind in a bloody mist. The panic vanished in an instant, replaced by an all-encompassing rage. How dare this mortal, this ant, to tell them what to do? To think he could evade death at the hands of one like them? Their mind was clear now. Yes, only this mortal's death would appease them now. Gaara felt themselves swell as the sand answered their call, slithering up from beneath the snow and dirt and raising them up and enveloping them in a snug armor. They surveyed the area with golden eyes. There was the one called Itachi, standing fearless before him, eyes spinning red and fierce. Gaara would teach him fear. The sand answered their call, slamming black-tipped claws through the shinobi, but as soon as the sand touched him he turned to shadows, winging away with hoarse cries. Gaara snarled, whirling around. But why did he want to kill Itachi-sensei anyways? He liked Itachi-sensei. No, they didn't. Itachi was a puny mortal with hateful eyes and Gaara would smash him into pulp when they caught him. A plume of fire blasted them from the side, but no mortal flame would penetrate their armor. Gaara lashed their tail, but Itachi leapt, twisting gracefully out of the way of their sand, and launched a wave of kunao. They clattered uselessly against the sand that rose to block them, but when they waved the sand away, Itachi was gone. No matter. The mortal could not outrun them forever. And when they caught him, his blood would be sweet salty, they could smell it. They licked their lips. There. Gaara shot out a claw, swiped it through the snow as the little shinobi darted about. But again, he was too fast and flitted out of reach. A barrage of shuriken pinged off their shield like rain. They whipped around and lunged, and a little tuft of silver gray slipped out of reach. 2 of them. They launched spines of sand, peppering the snow, but Kakashi remained infuriatingly out of reach. "We have a seal," said Kakashi, as Itachi appeared in a crouch at his side, and Gaara growled. They hated seals. Hated, hated, hated. But why did they hate seals? Seals didn't do anything to them. Developed for the incomplete Kyuubi, but should work well enough here, Kakashi was saying. Not if Gaara killed them first. They lashed out with a clawed paw, and the 2 little blurs scattered. But when Gaara turned around, the shinobi had multiplied. "That is one ugly motherfucker," muttered Zabuza. Gaara was not ugly. Gaara was beautiful and special. Nei-chan said so. Nei-chan? Gaara paused thoughtfully. Nei-chan wouldn't want him to kill their sensei. "What's the plan here?" asked Shisui. Gaara couldn't let them make a plan. They would lock Gaara away because they were afraid of them, and rightly so. Gaara would crush them all into a pulp. They slammed both paws into the ground, and from either side of the little huddle of shinobi a wave of sand erupted from the snow. They darted away like little flies, and Gaara batted at them, snarling. Something rammed into their back. Gaara turned with a roar, flailing as Zabuza cursed and leapt away, leaving behind his sword. Gaara flung it across the hollow, and Itachi ducked as it flew over his head. The screaming of 1,000 birds. Gaara whipped around as Kakashi charged with a fistful of lightning. Pathetic. Something so mundane could never touch. Gaara shrieked as the shinobi crashed straight through their shield, and only a wild swipe with their tail forced Kakashi aside before his jutsu could do more damage than carve a wide gouge in their armor. More sand. They needed more sand. The earth rumbled as the sand answered their call. Gaara glared around the clearing. Zabuza and Itachi hovered at healthy distances, but Kakashi and Shisui huddled next to the river, muttering urgently. Sitting out in the open so arrogantly. That would not do. Gaara would have to kill them for that. They shot out a clawed paw, and beneath the shinobi erupted a geyser of sand, boiling up from the snow. They swatted at the little shadow that darted away and... Sorry about this, Gaara-kun, said Shisui. Gaara whipped around too late and Shisui slapped a paper seal on their forehead. The world went dim and muted. Gaara stared woozily at the blurry sky. Little dots of snow fluttered down. One landed on his nose, and he went cross-eyed looking at it. A chill wind blew the flaps of his cloak up, and he shivered. Gaara-kun. Shisui-sensei's face swam into his field of vision, and Gaara blinked bemusedly up at him. How are you feeling? Gaara thought. It was quiet, almost too quiet. There was no rumbling of bloodlust at the back of his mind, no omnipresent fury. He swayed on his feet, and the familiar shifting at his feet prompted him to look down. He was standing on a veritable mountain of sand, far more than fit into his knapsack. He shifted his feet, and the sand shifted as well. Itachi-sensei, a slight frown darkening his face, stood at the base of the sand. Gaara. Gaara blinked at him owlishly. A few paces behind Itachi-sensei was the captain, one eye shut as he scrutinized Gaara carefully. And behind either of them, one hand resting on his sword hilt, Zabuza glowered. He'd tried to kill them. Gaara took a step back, but wavered on his feet as the strength abruptly left his legs. His control hadn't slipped so badly since the ambush last year. Shisui-sensei caught him by the shoulder with one hand. He quirked a crooked smile at Gaara. You're fine, he said. How about we get you to your bunk? Tamarine met them halfway, eyes pinched as she crouched to his height. Gaara. I'm fine, he muttered. He's a little out of it, Shisui-sensei said over his head. The seal cut off his connection to the Ichibi's chakra pretty abruptly. Nei-chan's hand brushed through his hair tentatively. Thanks, Shisui-sensei. I can take him, she said to Shisui-sensei, and towed Gaara by the wrist. Near to the fire, the Konoha kids watched as Gaara shuffled towards the sleeping quarters, tensed in a wary stillness. Gaara turned away. What happened, Gaara? Nei-chan asked quietly, when it was just the two of them sitting side by side in their top bunks. You were doing so well. Gaara shrugged and wrapped his cloak around him more snugly. Have you been talking to it again? No, Gaara said defensively, curling his fingers into a loose fist. Gaara. Tamarine leveled him with a significant stare. Gaara hunched in on himself. She always talks to me. I just tell her no, mostly, he muttered. Nei-chan exhaled with so much disappointment Gaara half wanted to rend the sleeping quarters apart. We talked about this, Gaara, she said. Remember? After it made you kill Yashamaru Aji. Gaara bared his teeth, but it was half-hearted. Father made me kill Yashamaru Aji, he retorted. Father may be the reason we left Suna, and father may have sent Yashamaru Aji to test you and lie to you, Tamarine said gently, but it was the demon that made you kill Yashamaru. Gaara glowered at the cave wall. Nei-chan nudged an elbow into his side. Remember when we met Naruto for the first time? She said with conspiratorial glint in her eyes. This scruffy little kid with so much mud on him his skin was practically gray. Gaara wrinkled his nose. He smelled gross, he complained. But you let him touch you and grab you and drag you off to meet his friends, countered Nei-chan. And you said the demon wanted you to kill him, and all of them, too. Gaara frowned. I wouldn't, he snapped. That would hurt Naruto and Hinata would be afraid of me again. She probably already was. Maybe, allowed to marry Nei, but you can't let the demon win. You almost killed your sensei today. Gaara's hands clenched in the folds of his cloak. I know, he said. It won't happen again. I won't let it. Nei-chan reached over to cradle the back of his neck with one hand and dropped a kiss on his forehead. I know, she said fondly. I love you, never forget that. Gaara leaned in, and together they watched the flickering fire outside as darkness fell. Check the description for the links to the author.